guidelines allow in-person instruction. And due to the county guidelines, the teacher-to-student ratio when providing the in-person instruction, especially when it's a modified or is what is routinely referred to as a hybrid model, then that ratio is limited to 1 teacher to 12 students. So with the current capacity, this would result in 48 students being enrolled at Albany Children's Center for the 2021 school year, as opposed to 72 in previous years. So working within these constraints, all 48 students will be enrolled based on subsidy priorities. We have 24 students returning, and we'll have spots then for 20 new students, and they're currently being offered enrollment opportunities. There will be a waiting list, and there is a current waiting list for all other students. So to give you a picture of what the program would look like going forward, we would have 12 students per classroom. We have 4 classrooms being used, which will include 1 teacher and again, a classified paraeducator. Next slide, please. Thank you, Julie. We sent out a survey to the current preschool community, and we asked them about returning to a modified schedule. The modified schedule would be partial day. We wanted to know if parents were interested in sending their student to a preschool that had a modified schedule. When we asked, about 78% responded that they would be favorable to sending their student back during a modified schedule. We also asked, under this modified schedule, since we'd like to stagger the arrival times and stagger the pickup times, what would be the most important or the most feasible time for parents to access a preschool? And you can see from the results, the 9 o'clock to 4 o'clock time frame was by far the most popular. When digging a little deeper into the reason why, the answer might be because the later the pickup time, the more convenient it is for parents to access a preschool program versus dropping a student off as early as possible. Again, parents were indicating that picking up students as late as possible was most preferable. Next slide, please. Again, we're opening with a remote model, but my hardworking staff has been preparing to transition to a modified and in-person instructional model as early as this summer. I really do want to commend their efforts. Again, our modified schedule would run from 7:30 to 4. You saw previously that we would have staggered drop-off and staggered pickup times. So we are preparing the facility for those staggered arrivals. We are working with the facilities to offer the daily temperature checks for staff and students. We are looking at modifying our food service and classroom spaces to keep students and staff safe. I wanted to include this classroom picture from teacher Jamie Shepard, and want to thank her again for letting us see what spaces are available in our preschool classrooms, how they are spread out, how nap times will be adjusted so that students are not next to each other, so that 6 feet of distancing is available for all students and staff members. Thank you again, teacher Jamie Shepard, for sharing a picture of your classroom efforts. Next slide, please. Again, in preparation for the upcoming school year, we have other personal protective equipment and technology supply purchases being made, and those purchases are being made using Albany Children's Center site funding sources. And we are currently working very hard to notify families of enrollment. We would like them to all be notified of their enrollment by August 7th. Again, our first day of instruction for new students is August 17th, 2020. Just to summarize, families are being contacted, again, to see if they would like a spot in the Albany Children's Center preschool for the 2021 school year. If they say yes, then we are looking at their subsidy eligibility. Again, our goal is to follow the state and county guidelines to make sure that families who receive subsidies are offered spots on a priority basis. When we reach 48 students, we will be at capacity for a remote and a hybrid model. Eventually, we would like to return. Eventually, we would like to return to a full in-person model, but we will do so only when the data allows us to enroll more than 48 students. I'd like to offer this time now to answer any questions.
Ms. Ritchie?
Yes.
Just a clarification. So even though we're beginning the school year remotely, ACC cannot accept more than 12 students per classroom in terms of instruction.
What would happen, Vice President Durand, if we enrolled more students, is that when we move to a hybrid model, we would need to release those students. We felt that was not equitable, nor was it feasible for families to be able to start with a remote model. But then as soon as we went to a hybrid model, again, we would have to reduce the number of students who could come on campus.
Did you consider that just being an option to ask parents about that possibility? I understand that when you go back to campus that there would be fewer students, but I was just wondering if maybe parents were interested. I mean, you know, based on enrollments, that the students, parents would meanwhile start looking for something, but that gives them a little while, since we know we're looking at least October 1 as a potential day for a different kind of learning. But you just decided that that wasn't really appropriate to even reach out to parents to ask them about that as an option.
I would think that that would be more of a hardship, but we could certainly explore
that. Go ahead, Trustee Hinckley.
I have a couple questions. I guess following on Clementina's, we have 2 classrooms in the preschool area that we're not using for TK. Did you consider using those 2 classrooms so that we could serve it? My understanding is the contract we have for preschool is 55 students. So to get us up to that 55 and perhaps more, did you consider using the other 2 classrooms?
We did, and there's a few more slides. I believe our chief business official or our chief human resources officer might be able to answer those questions based on what it would cost to open up those extra classrooms. And so perhaps we can go back to the slides and we can continue with the discussion. Perhaps that would address your question, Trustee Hinckley.
I'd like to break in here because I have a question on one of the slides that you've already shown. If you go back to the parent survey, and you mentioned about the times, you know, and it is clear that the earlier time has the smallest number of positive responses, and it grows until you get that huge group that would prefer to have the latest possible slot. Do you think that it might be possible to shift the schedule so that maybe there could be a 9:30 a.m. To a 4:30 p.m. cohort, for example?
Yes, President Trutain, I think that's a wonderful idea to explore, and that would make sense then based on the community needs. And so I agree that we could take a look at the start time, and if that wasn't necessarily the best for our community, we would be adjusting our start times and pickup times so that we could have a little bit of a flex when it comes to the pickup time. I agree. Thank you. So perhaps we can scroll then to the slides, which will show a breakdown of some expenses. Thank you. So I'll jump in and again ask for some feedback as well from our chief business official as well as our chief human resources official. So we currently have 4 classrooms that are pending for the 2021 school year. Of those 4 classrooms, we have 3 teachers. Teachers are delineated based on the certification that they have. And then we have 1 instructor. This has been the model for the previous school year, not many shifts there. So you can see that the total cost of all of the instructors combined with all of the paraeducators that are also assigned to the classrooms. We do have a secretary who is key to making sure that the community has a liaison. We have 1 AM custodian who's returning. And then of course, myself who takes over the director roles. So any questions about this? You can see that the total staffing for next year for the preschool program comes in at a little over $800,000.
Executive Director Ritchie, I think there's another number I think it's important for us to realize. You have your, I can call your attention to the columns. You have teacher 1, 2, and 3, and you see their salaries as it relates to the overall cost for the district, and that does include benefits. But that by itself doesn't mean much. I think the bottom line number is the total cost, which doesn't include the other additional costs that we provide for preschool, which are in kind and that have a price tag to it. But what's really important here is that preschool generate funding separate from TK-12. Their funding comes through a contract that we have with the state, and the maximum we can earn with the state, I believe, is $7,100. And you can see we're about 80,000 over right now, which means for this program, the way it's staffed now, we'll have to take money from the general fund that is generated primarily from our TK-12 program. And so the issue is, how do we work within our current funding so that the preschool could be self-sufficient with our support? And that's rhetorical, but the number of dollars expended exceed what comes in, and that's important to note because the board needs to be really informed on this so that they can make the best possible decisions moving forward about how to best support our preschool within our constraints of our budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Wells. And so to go back to Trustee Hinckley's question, opening up additional classrooms, especially when you're looking at a full teacher versus an instructor, would add to the general fund contributions at this point. The next slide.
And is that true even though many of those parents would be fee paying, not covered by the state contract, but paying actual fees?
I'm not quite sure if we would actually make that decision, as one of the guidelines would be to support our families in most need, especially those families that would need a subsidy. That could be a board discussion if you would like to explore only bringing in full fee families.
Sorry, I meant once we hit the 55 family threshold that we're allowed to serve subsidized families. After that, everyone pays fees, right? Out of the 72 that we have now, or am I wrong?
I think, Trustee Hinckley, it would be helpful for us to show you a scenario where we played with earlier, and that is, for example, what a full fee-based family would pay for a kid and what it would cost to staff the classroom. For example, you take teacher number 1, and I'm using the highest salary, and you take a para, it'll cost you about $150,000 to staff the classroom. And so the issue becomes, do we generate $150,000 for opening the classroom? And we fall way, way short of that. But I think it would be helpful if we just showed you a one-sheeter black and white. But the big picture is it doesn't generate enough money to pay for the salary, and it would put us further in debt and encroach on the general funds even further.
Just one clarification. Is it a problem for the state contract that we can't actually serve 55 families, even though that's what our contract is for?
Trustee, you faded out, Army. Can you repeat that, please?
Is it a problem for our state contract that we can't serve 55 subsidized families?
No, it's not a problem. We've had lots of discussion, including myself, with the chief person in charge of the programs here in California. They realize this is COVID-19 and everybody's in the same boat. And so they're making provisions now. And so they're committed to not harming any of us in California because we're now limited with our classrooms, for example, maximum 1 to 12, which means everybody take a significant reduction. And so how can we run programs? So we're fortunate that they're working with us to mitigate the cost. So we won't lose the contract by being under that, as long as the rationale for being under is because we're adhering to the 12-to-1 health guidelines.
Thank you, Superintendent Wells. I think there might be one more slide. Julie, if you could scroll up.
I had one question about the previous slide. Sorry, for this slide, I'm just wondering, as far as the teacher to pair ratio, have there been any discussion as to like what that looks like? Or is there a certain amount of pairs assigned to a class, or is it just one? Because there's 3 teachers, but then there's additional pairs there. So I'm wondering like how it's separated, or if that's something that.
I can speak to, I can take this question, Trustee Doss. So let's see. So what this chart here, what it's missing is the FTE for each of the positions. So with the 4 classrooms, we intended to staff it with the main teacher, slash instructor, and 1 full-time para per classroom. And then 1 full-time para would serve as like a roving, floating para to deliver breaks for staff. But on here, we've listed the salaries for more than 5 people, because when we are recalling staff, we're recalling staff in seniority order. And so sometimes folks have rights to a part-time position. And so all of these para positions total 5 FTE. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And then the other question, I'll save it for the next slide.
I guess that makes me ask a question. So Ms. Gonzalez, if for example, one of these paras is asking for a part-time position, then the total staffing charge would be for only the part-time, right? So we're not adding up the full-time for all 4, 6.
Correct. So what?
7.
So
Okay.
You'll see the first 3 para salary amounts listed. These are full-time personnel. And then the ones, like say the 4th one shows a salary and benefits cost of $21,000. It's significantly less because that is a part-time position.
Okay, I just wanted to be perfectly clear that the total staffing cost that's given is for the actual cost and not.
Yes, it's for the actual cost, because these staff have already been restored from the layoff list. So, and because they've been restored in seniority order, we can calculate what the true cost of each of these positions will be over the course of the year.
Okay, thank you very much for that explanation. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you. I think our Chief Business Officer, Jackie Kim, will be helping with the next slide. There's a little more information in terms of the contribution from the General Education Fund. Thank you, Ms. Kim.
Thank you, Director Ritchie. So this is based on 48 students in 4 classrooms and 100% subsidized families. Okay, so the state contract is 718,899. As you can see, the family fees are zero because if we have, for example, if we have 18,899 of family fees, then we will get 700,000 from state. So combined together, that's the maximum we can earn for the subsidized families. Okay, so supplies fees from parents, $4,800, that is $100 per family, so it's $4,800. And food revenue is the reimbursement rate from the state and federal that we get for our students based on the number of meals that we served. And salaries and benefits, Director Rich went over from the previous slide is about 800,000. And substitute, so these are from substitute all the way to food expenditures. Those are actual costs from last year's, and we prorated. For example, last year it was 10.5 hours, and now I have prorated for 6.5 hours, and also with less staffing. So it is all prorated there. Same thing with utilities, food expenditures. Food expenditures, I also eliminate those food expenditures and revenues for the first maybe 3.5 months. For July, August, September, and October, then we will be in a remote learning. Okay, and the last expenditure item, indirect cost, is 5.6% of the state provided rate. So you can see net loss of 195,701. This means a contribution from our general fund. Any questions that you might have? Otherwise, it's open up for the board.
I have a quick question. Trustee Hinckley a few minutes ago talked about that the contract that we have for preschool, I forget the number, was it 55 or 54? But it looks like this is saying that 48 full-time preschool students would completely use all of our state contract money. So is that because all of these 48 students that you're talking about will be full-time students, or is there some portion of the money that we're missing here?
Right. We assume that this will be the full-time 48 students, and we are also hoping that we will get the full funding from the state. And I'm sorry, I wanted to address Trustee Hinckley's question, and I just forgot for a few seconds. So here we are, if you can see this. So I did quick numbers. So what if we really have 60 students or 72 students, meaning we will have full paid families for additional class or two, even though we don't have a capacities at this point, right? For example, we only had 4 classrooms in preschool last year. We don't have teachers at this point. We will have to find a teachers, right? But I just did our numbers just to see the dollar amount. So now we can collect the family fees. So family fees for the additional class of 12 students will be monthly fees are about $1,450. So you can see right here, $1,450, but then I prorated for 6.5 hours instead of 10.5 hours for 12 students and for 12 months. So this is the maximum family fees that we are expecting to have. And also the food revenue went up based on number of students. So then here, I also added same as 800,000 plus maybe average teachers or a little less because maybe we might have less experienced teachers and maybe because we just don't have teachers at this point yet for the preschool. And I also added another second person. So here is what we have. And also everything else is prorated as well. Okay. So we are going to expect to see more of net loss and also more of general fund contributions in these scenarios, even though we have more revenues. Because when we see another 12 students, which means on a class, we will get about 130,000, but then the staffing costs exceed than our family fees.
So CBO Kim, just a question. In looking at the food revenue, it's half of what, or less than half of the food expenses. Why is that?
So the reason is we get those reimbursement from the state and federal, and the rate is of course pretty low. But the Food Fund 13 food program charges about maybe $3 per lunch. Is little less than what food service charges our students, but it's certainly a little less. So another way to think about it is actually this $1,450, the tuition, included all the food costs. Meaning when you look at the Children's Center's family fees, it says our fee include food costs. So we just have to think that this is included in our service to operate this program.
Yeah, I have a question, President Trutang.
Go ahead, Trustee Clark.
Yeah, so this is for Ms. Kim. So if you look at the salaries and benefits for the 48 students, it's approximately 800,000.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you go to 60 students, that's one more class, right?
Right, correct.
So one extra teacher costs $160,000?
We actually have two staffing, one teacher and one para, because in our preschool program, we always have two adults in one classroom.
It's still, so it's $160,000 extra, you're saying, for
2 FTE for one class.
Yeah, but based on some of the numbers before on the other slide, that seems to be high to me.
So we can go back to, Julie, could you pull up the slide that we have for the budget? Thank you. So one before. So teacher, I use about 100,000, and para, I use about 60,000. So it shows 160,000 for 2 FTE.
Right, but if you say there's nobody in that position, you would not be paying somebody most likely that high. And then the para seems to be quite high too. But also, let's just say you use that 160,000 number. Like, that's just an estimate of what you think it would cost. And it seems to be on the high end to me.
Let's see.
Maybe I can jump in here. When we're restoring staff, we do have to restore in seniority order. And so in seniority order, those are going to be the folks who have the longest tenure with the district and are the highest on the salary schedule. And so these salaries and benefits that are listed here, these are actually true costs. And I can tell you that the next, the next teachers on the seniority list, their salary and benefit cost is $100,000. And the paras, we use the average of 60,000 because as you can see, the first 3 here that are full-time, their costs range between 61,000 and 70,000. So we use the estimate of 60, which is on the lower end, but that would include salaries, that includes longevity, that includes full family benefits. It's total cost. So the 160 is, it's on par with what it would cost to add 2 more staff per classroom.
All right, thank you. And in previous meetings, I've heard some parents say that they would be willing to pay more. Has there been any thought or discussion about that as far as trying to increase the fees to offset some of this cost?
Trustee Clark, yes, but there's been no decision or recommendation to do so, but it's something that we're interested in further exploring in both of our programs, preschool and our before and after school programs.
Well, I think it's important to ask people if they'd be willing to pay more. It seems like, and I mentioned this before, that this program might be in jeopardy. And if people realize how serious it is to be given the option to at least know, hey, this is the situation we're in, and then to kind of plug in some numbers that if we charged it up, if we raised it up to this amount, how much would it offset some of that? I mean, to just be completely honest, I mean, eventually we're going to get through this pandemic. The Children's Center has been with us for a long time. It's a very important institution in our community, and I don't want to see it be something that is possibly going to go away because we're in this pandemic that hopefully we're out of it soon. So even if the district has to take a hit financially to keep this program running, that's what I would advocate for.
I would like to interject here just to let the board know that staff is certainly available to take any more questions from the board on this presentation. This is review and discussion. We won't be taking any kind of a vote tonight. But it's also to give the people that are watching this a heads up that we'll be having public comment in just a few minutes. And I would like to limit public comment to, let's try for 20 minutes. And we'll decide when we see how many hands are up, how many speakers we can take. And so just get ready for that. And then I bring it back to the board for any further questions from the board before we go to public comment.
Can I ask a non-budget question about an earlier slide, just where you talked about the guidance for county health guidance for reopening. Could you talk about what the criteria are for preschools as compared to K-12, and both what the state and county guidelines are, and also what you guys are thinking about in terms of what would get us to a point of reopening? I think, as you mentioned, a lot of staff have already been spending time figuring out how to reopen safely in person. So I'd just like to hear what that looks like and how it relates to, more and more information coming out about young children versus older children, and new state guidance for reopening programs for younger kids, and the fact that other preschools are already operating. I'd just like to hear more sort of what that process is for moving back into an in-person preschool.
Trustee Hinckley, that was a really good question, some of which would lead to lots of speculation, but I'd like to hone in on the facts. Right now, the county guidelines allow us to do a maximum 1:12 classroom ratio. As it relates to the criteria for considering opening schools, we have that spelled out, and I think that's coming to the board rather quickly. But right now it's 14 days. We have to be off the watch list, and we have to adhere to the county uniform guidelines that they're putting out shortly. And we wanted to, because this is a health crisis, we wanted to follow the health official guidelines. And so that's what we're going to be adhering to. A lot of preschools are not opening in Alameda County, and some that are opening, they're opening very slow phases, 1 to 4, 1 to 5, 1 to 6. Many are not going to 1 to 12. immediately. It's a phase-in approach when they do finally go in. I don't know if that answering all of your questions, some. You know, one week we think we have a good grip on this and understanding, and the next week we're re-pivoting because of edicts we get from the state or you know, new guidelines that come out. And so other staff members, feel free to chime in, but those are good, fair questions. But I wanted to stay with the facts, but the other pieces would be more of a speculation for myself. Trustee Doss.
I had a couple of questions. One was with the, so is this discussion based on, this is based on like the reopening, but this wouldn't apply to distance learning? The reason why I'll ask to make it a little more, if we are in person and the teacher starts at 7:30, then sometime throughout that day, that teacher will need a break. And so then somebody will come in and give that teacher a break while they go and do, you know, take their break, which obviously they need because they're there, you know, working. But if we're speaking about distance learning, which is what's currently in place and what we voted on, then the person's not coming, is the person still coming to give that person a break during distance learning, or are they just turning off their computer for 15 minutes and then jumping back on? And then my second question, if we could get clarification, didn't we recently increase the fees at the preschool already? So I'm wondering if how fair that would be, or how inclusive that would be to raise it again. Yeah, so I'm just wondering if we could get clarification on that.
I think I can address your first question, Trustee Doss. The paraeducators are certainly scheduled to come back and be ready when we have in-person instruction. So as you can see, we were in preparation for, and we've had some conversations with our community and our board. We were all set to open with a modified program, and then the county and data indicated that we could not. So all of those individuals were brought back with the anticipation that we would be able to be ready for a modified program. Please note that our original program went from about 7:30 to 6 o'clock. Our modified program will go from 7:30 to 4, but you're absolutely right. The breaks needed and the ratios needed for students will still need to have 2 adults in each classroom. So we are ready as soon as we're given the green light to open with a modified schedule, and we have the personnel then to do so.
Trustee Dawson, in addition to that, it's important to highlight that our contract with the state is for 6.5 hours daily. And so at some point, as we make our program a more viable program and to solidify it and to protect it, we might need to start working within our contractual limits to have it cost effective and back working independently. But that's something to note, and we're gonna have to put our heads together with our staff and our planning teams about the best course of action moving forward. We know this pandemic gave us a hit and really upset our program, a program that we value. In terms of your other question, Trustee Doss, I don't know when the last time we had a raise to the program, but we can certainly research it. Or I should say increase the fees.
Vice President Duran?
Yes, I wanted to ask Mr. Borrego if he has examined the air filter system at the preschool in thinking about reopening, just like we've heard concerns about Cornell School. Have you looked at that, and what would be your response at this present time regarding the condition of the air filtering system at the preschool?
there's a company that we look at the units, and the units are fairly are efficient units to be able to handle the sessions. We are going to have them clean the air ducts, but as far as the units themselves, they will be ready to go efficiently.
Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to give Executive Director Ritchie a quick chance to summarize before we go to public comment. I just mean the date that we plan on opening to new students at the preschool, and whether we're going to open the preschool in remote learning, and the staff that were listed there on the budget slides. There was a mention that all of those staff have been brought back. And so if you can comment on how the instructors and the paraeducators will combine their efforts in the remote learning situation. If you could have any comments or speak to that, I think it would be helpful, just sort of to wrap up this section.
Thank you. So just to summarize, the current state of Albany preschool is one which includes 24 students who we think would be returning. We are contacting all of those families to see if they would like to return. Again, we had some information based on parent surveys, but we do need to go line by line to see if the 24 eligible students are interested in returning. Once we have determined that, we will be opening up spots to the capacity of 48. Of those, we anticipate most of them, if not all of them, to be families who qualify for a full subsidy. What we're doing then is having a remote program that includes both what you would consider packets or hands-on work that's distributed to each family. The families come up to the front of Albany Children's Center, they pick up their work on a weekly basis, and then they interface with each of the teachers or the instructor on an appropriate platform for preschoolers. For example, an appropriate platform being used right now is called Marco Polo. That's actually accessed on anybody's cell phone. So the current remote teaching model does include some packets that go home with each student, as well as some remote platforms that again are appropriate for that age of student. That would continue until we are able to open under a modified program. And you can see it's a little different from a hybrid program. Our modified program actually includes, and I think we've reviewed this already, students coming on campus 5 days a week, but under a modified schedule. So we will certainly keep our community posted, because as soon as we can, we'll be back on campus and in person with our preschool programs with a modified program.
Thank you. I think that was very helpful. I'd like to move to public comment at this time. And it looks like we'll be able to, I see 3 hands raised in our attendees. And so we'll be able to give 3 minutes for each of our community members to make their comments. So remember that when you are announced, you do have to unmute yourself for us to be able to hear you in the meeting. And I hope that district staff will help with the timing.
Okay. Our first speaker is Kathy Anakama.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I just had a quick comment in terms of thinking about the viability of the program moving forward and the discussion of possibly raising fees for either preschool or the before school, after school program. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone keeps in mind is that Albany is pretty diverse, and we have a lot of families that will qualify for subsidized fees, and we also have a lot of wealthy families that will be able to afford a higher fee. But then we have all the families in the middle who will not qualify for subsidized fee and will not be able to afford the higher fees. And just keeping in mind that there's a wide range in our community who are using these services, and if we raise them high, it's going to be challenging for those of us stuck in the middle. Thank you.
Thank
Our
you.
next, Our next speaker is Miriam Walden. Go ahead, Miriam.
Hi, I just wanted to comment on the salaries, because I think that sometimes when the staff give numbers for salaries that include all the benefits, it makes it seem as though teachers are making a lot of money, and it's very hard for the public to understand what people are actually getting paid. So I did some research on the public records, and the highest paid teacher at the preschool, who is, had many years of service, in terms of what they're earning, their salary before taxes in 2018 was $71,000. So when you see that big figure, that's including the benefits, but what the staff also isn't mentioning is the payroll taxes and the pension charges that the state puts on those employees. So that's why the numbers look so big. In fact, our staff at the Children's Center make a lot less money than our staff in the regular program. The highest paid paraeducator in the entire system makes $34,000 a year. So when you see that $60,000 number, you're not looking at money that's going to that staff person. It's money that's going to taxes and things like that. So just to be really, really clear, so that the public doesn't get this impression that the teachers are making all that money.
Thank you, Ms. Walden.
The last speaker is Sine Vuchanov. Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. I have just a couple clarification regarding the staffing for the ACC program. I know you guys, you are going to restore most of the paraeducator, but those paraeducator who's going to work at the ACC, are they from the, as you said, I think you said that from seniorities, even from other schools, like other elementaries and high school and middle school, or just the one who worked already at the ACC? Because I know at ACC, most of them, like I know like five of them, they're new hire. They are like not even a year that they've been there. Are they you're gonna start with those that already worked in there, or based on the seniorities, as you said before? Thank you so much.
Thank you for the comment. Ms. Gonzalez, could you speak to the question that was in the last comment?
Absolutely. So seniority is based on someone's tenure in a specific classification. All of the folks who have been restored into these positions have been in these classifications for the longest period of time. Does that answer your question?
I understood the question to be more to the whether paraeducators that were working at the elementary schools, for example, or the middle or high school even, would be considered for these positions, or if it's only paraeducators that had worked previously at ACC.
It would be paraeducators who held seniority, or who have the longest seniority in these classifications. So in this case, in this particular case, because these classifications are paraeducator, Albany Children's Center, specific to the Albany Children's Center, they were paraeducators who were at the Children's Center. That's not always the case in all classifications.
I see. Thank you very much. I bring it back to the board for any further questions.
I had a question of point of clarification. So we're thinking about distance learning in, or can we use like kindergarten for example, the ratio 24:1, there's 24 students to one teacher. So in the distance learning model, it's that one teacher, those 24 students, and then, you know, how the distance learning happens is how it happens. And I know we haven't talked about that yet. If we shift that to what we're talking about here, the preschool age students, it's 12:1 as was mentioned. So you have 12 students, one teacher, and one para. So I guess my question is, during the distance learning time, what is that para gonna do while that teacher is working with those 12 students?
Trustee Doss, you asked a really good, fair question, one of which we've been grappling with. And because they're employed, we want to use them as effectively as we can. And so it may look a little different from class to class, or we may decide to reassign based on district-wide needs in areas. And so we're grappling with that, but it really depends as we look at not just one entity of this institution, but all the entire institution, and reassigning people potentially temporarily based on need. That is an option. Not saying that's something we're going to do, but it's something we will consider if we have a need over here and we know that we have paras here. We're going to move people around because times are different, and most importantly, we got to do what's best for our kids. And so that is a viable option. And that's something we're grappling with as a unit.
Thank you.
Okay. This has been our item 5-1, Albany Children's Center Preschool Program Update. I'd like to move to our agenda item number 6, review and action. 6-1, Albany Children's Center School Age Before and After Care School Care Program. Dr. Wells, would you like to introduce this item?
Yes, President Tutain. We have another viable and valued program for our community, and it's known as our Before and After School Program. And so we're looking at a number of different scenarios and issues that come up in those different scenarios about what are we going to do to try to assist families who are participating in distance learning, who need all day care and assistance, or for a few hours a day. And then how do we meet and adhere to the contract we have with the state? And so it's a balancing act. One of the trustees requested that we don't come with necessarily a recommendation for this item, but that we come with some scenarios for the board to weigh in and make a decision on what scenario we're going to engage in. And then once the board selects the what, we can now huddle up with our families and communities and our stakeholders and figure out the how. But before we can do the how, we have to get the what. And so what you're going to have tonight is 3 scenarios, I believe, on the what. And the board is going to be weighing in and making a selection on one of the 3 scenarios. And that will determine, again, our what. And then we get to huddle up with our stakeholders and figure out the how. The presentation tonight will be facilitated by our Assistant Superintendent, Marie Williams. And at this time, I turn it over to her.
Thank you, Superintendent Wells. Good evening, board and community that are watching via Zoom. As Dr. Wells indicated, the purpose of this item tonight is for the Board of Education to take action to approve a program model for the ACC Before and After Care program for the upcoming school year 2020-2021. Just a quick note. So we sort of use some terms interchangeably: school age, before and after care, and child care. So as I use those terms, and I'll try to be consistent this evening, we are speaking about our before and after care program. I also just, I want to start sort of maybe uncharacteristically for me by acknowledging for our families the magnitude of this situation, the magnitude of the difficulty that families face in finding appropriate childcare during this time of COVID-19. I'll say that I myself have a school-age child who has participated in the before and after school program, and as a single parent, I too am experiencing some anxiety around what childcare is going to look like in the fall and beyond. So I really understand the needs of families who rely on the services provided by this program, and I'm honored and grateful and humbled to have the opportunity to support this program going forward. So thank you for allowing me to say that. That being said, we're going to go to our first slide. So tonight, our presentation is going to be made in 3 parts. I'm going to provide a general overview of the program and a timeline of activities relative to our school-age program. Our Chief Human Resources Official, Marina Gonzalez, is going to speak about staffing. As Dr. Wells indicated, there'll be some scenarios presented for staffing. And then our CBO, Jackie Kim, will address financial implications for those scenarios. So if we can go to the next slide. So just for the benefit of those not familiar with our school-age program, here's a brief overview. The school-age program provides childcare services to students outside, typically outside of their school day. The program is offered at all 3 elementary schools. Services when we were on campus and in person began as early as 7:30 in the morning and ended at 6 at night. In addition to general childcare, the program includes a Spanish and Mandarin Immersion program, both of which are very popular. We can go, stay on this slide here. Last year, a total of 416 students were enrolled in the school-age program. And of those, 127 students were subsidized, 81 students were fully subsidized, and 46 were partially subsidized. The source of those subsidies, what we have been referring to in our recent conversations as the contracts, will be reviewed briefly next. So we can go to the next slide. So the district receives funds through 2 contracts to serve income-eligible preschool and income-eligible school-age students. The school-age contract provides care for school-age students during non-school hours, as I stated before. Prior to March 13th, those services were provided in person, and during the period of our spring school closures, those services were provided remotely. We have noted the language from the Ed Code here specifically so that you can see that we are trying to potentially, if we might be able to flex the contract, to provide services to families during the school day. So that's what you're going to see a little bit of when we present the scenarios in a little while. This possibility and information that we have gathered today from CDE will also be discussed in just a little while. So we can go to the next slide. So what is this contract and how does it work? So the contract is an agreement between the district and CDE. It's earned by providing before and after care to income eligible students. Services are verified by in-person attendance. The contract reimburses the district up to a maximum allowable amount for providing services. And during the ongoing period of school closures, the contract can be earned by providing remote childcare or before and after care services. Before we leave the topic of the contract, the next slide shows a calculation for how the maximum contract can be earned. And I'm going to ask CBO Kim to walk us through that next slide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Assistant Superintendent Williams. So here is how we can earn our maximum contract. So $53 per day is our reimbursement rate for full-time students for 6.5 hours a day. And we provide 182 days for our child care program. So the maximum reimbursement per student for a year is about $9,646. So now we have this maximum contract of 465,150. That divided by 9,646 will give us 48 students. Meaning, we will need 48 students to earn our maximum contract. Okay, so that also means we will need to have 4 classrooms, 12-to-1 ratio, to earn the maximum contract.
Thank you, CBO Kim. We can go to the next slide. So there have been sort of a flurry of activities, particularly at the state level. And so I wanted just here to highlight a few of these pieces. So as we know, on July the 14th, the governing board approved a hybrid model for reopening school that will begin with a period of remote instruction. So when it is safe to do so, we will begin a hybrid model. And then just 3 days after that, we received additional guidance from Governor Newsom that ordered that schools remain closed unless they were off that watch list for 14 days. So information is sort of changing daily, and we try to keep abreast of that and govern ourselves accordingly. We recently learned that we can earn the before and after school contract by providing remote instruction. And in the final bullet I wanted to address was the third from the bottom here, and it's about a school age planning team. So Executive Director Ritchie formulated a preschool planning team and was very gracious in allowing school age folks to join that planning team. The purpose of meeting together then would be to discuss how we were going to open a program and how we would support students in whatever scenario is determined. So last week was our first meeting. It was a brief meeting. And then yesterday we would have had our second meeting. But given that the board today is deliberating this topic and is determining the what, as Dr. Wells said, we did postpone yesterday's meeting, and we'll pick up again on Monday after the board has taken action regarding a model. So I know that there was some concern about that meeting not taking place yesterday and folks may be feeling like their input would not be received, but I want to assure the community and the committee that we will continue to meet and plan and that we will be well situated to do that once the board takes action this evening. So we can go to the next slide. So this next slide just provides a brief summary of our spring remote learning experience. Students participating in school-age childcare were in communication with their teachers and also received resources to support their lessons at home. We can go to the next slide. As we look to fall programming, I want to remind the community that students will receive remote instruction. All students will receive remote instruction until it is deemed safe to transition to the hybrid model. And that would include providing remote before and after care services. So on the next slide, we have been gathering information. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. We've been gathering information. Our parents have been very patient in responding to all of the surveys we have been sharing with them. So we surveyed all of the parents, all of our elementary parents in the district, and we asked a couple questions. We asked, first of all, when the school year begins on August the 25th, do you need childcare during the school day? So as of July the 30th, when this item posted, we had received quite a few responses, and 247 families indicated that they would in fact need in the day childcare when school opens remotely. And I just put a note in parentheses that of those families, 92 indicated that they were participating in our childcare program last year. So we know that in our community, there are other options for childcare, and we know that actually the need outweighs the resources, but I did want to note that 92 of our families last year are indicating that they would continue to have a need in addition to other families. We also asked a question about whether or not families would be interested potentially in aftercare services. These would be in person with an emphasis on enrichment and outdoor activities. And to that question, 281 families responded yes. So there is another survey that we just shared with our existing school-age families on Friday. And so I don't have the slide to show you, but I do have some information to share regarding a question we asked our current families. And so we asked our current school-age families who participated last year in before and after programs if they would be interested in remote learning beginning in the fall. And in particular for families who were full fee paying families, we asked if families would be willing to pay fees for those remote services beginning in the fall. So far we've received 139 responses, and 32 families responded that yes, they would be interested in receiving remote childcare. And all but 2 of those families last year were full fee paying families and would anticipate being full fee paying families going forward. So we continue to collect responses to those surveys. And so if families have not yet had an opportunity to fill out the surveys, we can certainly resend them, and so that we can gather as much input as possible as we move forward. We can go to the next slide. So in terms of next steps, I just want to talk a little bit about what we do next. Once we receive direction from the board in the form of an action tonight, identifying a program model for our program next year, we will continue to meet with our school age planning team around what that program will look like. So tonight we will receive direction on the what, and then we will take up the how. We will need to submit a plan to CDE, and then we will continue to monitor CDE guidance around program administration. I also wanted to mention, relative to the last bullet here, which indicates collaborating with local childcare providers, YMCA Friendship Club, to maximize opportunities. We have had the opportunity to have a couple conversations with the Y and Friendship Club, because these are organizations that also provide before and aftercare to our families. And ultimately, I think our goal is to maximize the number of childcare opportunities in the community. So when we sent the survey out, the first survey that asked about a need for services during the day and asked if families would be interested in an enrichment type program in the afternoon, we did share that information also with the YMCA. I just wanted to note also, last year Friendship Club served about 85 families and the Y served about 200 families. So again, there is a greater need than there are resources, and we want to try to maximize the opportunities available. In addition to services that we might be able to provide, we want to work collaboratively with our partners to meet as many families' needs as possible. So I am going to turn this presentation over to our Chief Human Resources Official, Marina Gonzalez. She's going to present some information about some of the questions that we've been grappling with, some of the answers we have and have not yet received, and then also talk about staffing. Thank you.
Real quick before we jump into the, can you, well, 2 things. One, you said that you were collecting information from the surveys that just recently went out. And I know that you haven't probably got a chance to get all those together, and people are probably still filling them out. So can you follow up with us once, once that's all in, kind of let us know, what people are saying? I think it'd be.
Yes, absolutely. So we captured in the second survey that asked about remote learning in particular, we sent those emails, we sent that survey directly to families that we serve. So we do have an opportunity to resend that survey directly to those families. And then for the survey that we sent to the whole district, we just will keep that survey open. I don't think we're anticipating that everybody will respond, but we certainly can send a reminder to families just to get the maximum number of responses. And we'll be happy to share that information once we get to a place where we feel like we might not get more.
Yeah, because I think it'd be beneficial to hear from those families that are that will and want to participate in the distance learning portion of it, and how many of those are fee paying, and then how many are subsidized, and having a clear number. I think that will help the board kind of make the decision. If there's 4 students who actually want to participate, then that might not be the best option. But if there's 60 students that want and need to participate, then the board can take that information and and kind of help to grapple with the kind of decisions that we have. So.
Yeah, so maybe Trustee Doss, if you might permit me to just restate a statistic that was not on one of those slides because we just sent it out on Friday. And so this, I think, speaks to your question. So of the 400 and odd families that participated last year in childcare, we asked specifically if those families would be interested in a remote childcare option. And we also specifically asked for folks who were fee paying if they would be interested in paying fees for that remote service. So 32 of the 139 families that have responded so far that paid full fees last year have indicated that they would be interested in paying for a remote service going forward. So that at least is some data to sort of begin our conversations with. But we will continue to collect that information and provide it to you.
Yeah, I have a question, President Chute.
Sure, go ahead, Trustee Clark.
Yeah, Assistant Superintendent Williams, could you please clarify a little bit more what we mean by a partnership with the YMCA and the Albany City Friendship Club?
Yeah, so as I said, the YMCA and the Friendship Club are interested in providing services. And so, as I said last year, YMCA served about 200 families and Friendship Club served about 85 families. So we know that the need for childcare exceeds our capacity to provide that childcare. So partnership means that we are having a conversation about what piece, how they might provide a service and how we might provide a service. When we sent out the survey, we shared, not with any students' information, of course, but just grand totals. We shared information about sort of what families were thinking about for next year. And they, both the YMCA and Friendship Club, are very interested in receiving our schedule so that they can determine then how they will be able to offer services to their families. So I think this question has come up a few times, and I certainly don't mean it to suggest that we will not be providing services and or might be giving our services away, but that, again, there are more families that need to be served than any one of the three of our organizations can serve. And so we want to work together to try to serve the maximum number of families in the Albany community. And so right now that's means being in conversation with them.
Yeah, thank you. Just want to follow up on that. So are we offering our state contracts or just our space?
No, we're not offering anything at this time. We're just gathering information and gathering information from each other and are just being part of one conversation and thinking about how we might move forward. We've not made any offers. We're just talking. But we appreciate their willingness to want to be in that conversation with them, and we too want to be in that conversation to try to meet as much of the need that exists in the community as possible. Thank you for asking that follow-up.
Thank you.
Assistant Superintendent Williams, in terms of the overwhelming need that you've described, have you started sort of spelling out or thinking a definition of how you're going to decide the ranking of students in terms of who will be, served? How is that going to be rolled out?
Yeah, so we have not made any decisions about that. I would imagine that we would begin by prioritizing our subsidized income eligible families. And then I think we would probably take some cues from Executive Director Ritchie alluded to some criteria that they are identifying to serve families at the preschool. So we would probably want to make sure that our rankings were in alignment with what is being determined at the preschool so that there's uniformity in the district. So thinking about, potentially children of essential workers as a category, certainly prioritizing our subsidized families. And then, maybe thinking about, do we prioritize the families that are pre-existing versus new families? So I think once a decision is made, and I think once we determine the capacity, then we would work to iron out that criteria.
Thank you.
Just before we get to Ms. Gonzalez's portion of this presentation, I just wanted to mention to all of the people watching that we will go through the entire presentation and entertain board questions, and then we'll have the public comment period. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for being engaged, and just hold on. There will be time for public comment. I think that now we'll turn it over to our Chief Human Resources Officer, Ms. Gonzalez.
Thank you, President Trutain. Julie, can we move to the next slide? So as we started to try to develop some options to present to the board, there were so many pieces to try to fit together because, as Assistant Superintendent Williams said, things have been rapidly changing. Guidelines and guidance and edicts have been coming at us in a flurry, and we have a lot of questions about this program, and there are still some unanswered questions that are out there. And so we turn this here on this slide is a list of the different agencies that we've consulted to try to get answers to our questions. So of course, the California Department of Public Health, our county public health department, because we have these contracts that allow for subsidized services through the CDE, the California Department of Education, our Alameda County State Contractors. This is, I'll just explain what that is. This is a group of folks who also have contracts with the CDE that come together to hear information distilled down so that folks can understand, you know, what these, they send out these management bulletins and what these management bulletins are trying to say. We have, as part of the preschool planning, we sort of started using that maybe in thinking about a template for what the before and after school might look like. And we invited school age staff to start joining those meetings, the Alameda County Office of Education, and we even consulted our legal counsel. And then of course, our labor partners are also involved. So lots of guidance, still many unanswered questions. Next slide, please. So again, in developing the options, these are the guiding principles that we used. Of course, we've heard a lot of folks talk about these contracts. These contracts are issued by the CDE, and they allocate a certain dollar amount that we can earn through reimbursements, as Assistant Superintendent Williams said, where we are providing services to families who, who need the subsidy. And so we've had these contracts for decades, over 70 plus years. And it's a valued service, and we definitely don't want to lose them for our inability to comply with whatever their requirements are. The other guiding principle, meeting the needs of families. And you heard earlier that we had 416 families in this program last year. And at this time, because of COVID and class size restrictions, so forth, we won't be able to meet the needs of all those families. But we focused on how many families can we help during this time. The next one is restoring staff. You heard me talk earlier about seniority. We have staff who have been here a very long time with us, who have committed their careers to teaching our students and to adding value to this before and after school program. You heard about the different enrichment services that are offered at this program. And so we want, as much as possible, to bring back staff to the extent that we can. And then of course, our duty to ensure fiscal stability for the district budget. So all of these were things that we took into consideration. Next slide, please. So these are some of the questions that are still pending. So I'll just read them and I'll explain what we mean by that. So our childcare centers operated by districts subject to the same restrictions that childcare centers not operated by districts. So we've heard that preschools and childcare centers are open. And we know this, these are privately run programs. The question is, school districts were ordered to close their campuses and are not permitted to bring students back on campus unless their county is willing to issue a waiver, right? And we know that applies to elementary, and this program is elementary. So the question then is, since we are a district that is operating the child care program, is that subject to the same closure or the same waiver requirements? And we haven't had an answer. And you saw the list of the different agencies that we've consulted. And as recently as Monday, I received an email that said, we still don't have an answer for you. So that's where we are with that. The next question is, can the contract be earned by providing childcare services within the hours of a student's school day? So this contract is earned by providing childcare services that are outside of an individual student's school day. So that's why we call it before and after. Or for instance, we've heard a question came up about that the program operated from 7:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Yes, but the students that were in care during what we might think of as the school day, those might have been like AM kindergartners or PM kindergartners that are switching off. So they're not receiving care while they are also in school for that individual student. And so right now, we asked this question to the CDE, can we flex this contract? And the answer was, we don't know. So the next question, can the full contract be earned in a hybrid model when students are not participating in childcare but are attending in person? So we know that our district has opted for a hybrid once we're able to move to hybrid. And so we know that then students will be in school, in class with their classroom teachers for 2 days a week. And then they'll be doing distance learning the other 3 days a week. And so when they're in distance learning, can then they be served with childcare services by our Albany Children's Center? And we don't have an answer for that either. Next slide, please. And so again, as we move towards developing these options, we built in assumptions that the following conditions on this slide have all been met. And so they are that the program is either eligible for a waiver by the county or that no waiver is required. That the contract can be earned during school hours for us to provide full day childcare. That also that the CDE will allow the full contract to be earned when the district transitions to hybrid. That our program staff will return to campus to provide in-person childcare. That in-person classroom ratios will not exceed 1 to 12 per the current county guidelines. That the childcare may not exceed the current before and after school facility capacity in anticipation of transitioning to hybrid. So what that means is that in 1920, there were 7 classrooms across the 3 elementary sites. There were 3 rooms, 3 classes at Marin, 2 at Cornell, and 2 for the Ocean View campus. And so if we are preparing to move to a hybrid model and having teachers and students back in classrooms, then we wouldn't want to grow this program at this time, because then we would not have enough, we wouldn't have enough facility space to operate the program when we return to hybrid. So that's what this is saying here. So with 7 classrooms at 12 to 1, then the maximum number of students that can be served is 84. The childcare is funded for a maximum of 6.5 hours per day. So Dr. Wells mentioned this earlier, that we are going to, we have to move to a position where we are working within our contractual limits. And that childcare may have to implement more than one model during the school year. So this is, flexing from, if possible, full day daycare 5 days a week to hybrid and maybe back again. And so that is also another assumption. Julie, can you the next slide, please? Okay, and just to explain sort of what we mean when we move to hybrid and what the childcare program would look like. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, that in a hybrid model that students would attend school 2 days a week, either Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday, and they would receive remote instruction 3 days per week. So if the in-person childcare is provided during the day, when the district transitions to the hybrid, childcare groups would potentially be no more than 6 students on Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday, but on Wednesdays, all 12 students would still receive in-person childcare. And so because we're at the 12-to-1 ratio limit, then we couldn't necessarily open up spots to more students. Next slide, please, Julie. Okay, so as you can see, there was a lot to take into consideration when trying to develop these options. So we're getting there. We know that at the July 14th board meeting, the board approved a remote opening with a scheduled check-in day on October 6th, where Superintendent Wells will assess the readiness for reopening schools and then provide a recommendation to the board in terms of how we want to continue if we're ready to transition to a hybrid model. And so if you've seen the packet, you will have seen that there are 2 sets of options. And this slide here, these are to help you understand how those were built, right? So the first is assuming that we stay in a remote childcare, offering distance or remote childcare starting on August 25th until we move to a hybrid model. And for the purposes of building the budget, there's an assumption built in that we are in this remote childcare for 48 days before moving to remote. And then the second set of options is assuming that we are able, all those conditions have been met that we saw earlier, and that we're able to come on campus and provide in-person childcare 5 days a week beginning on August 25th. And then that we're in that for 48 days until we move to the hybrid model. Next slide, please, Julie. Okay, so now we get into when building the staffing projections for the different sets of options. These are the requirements that we had to meet. So firstly, in a 1-to-12 ratio, which is what we're using, the adult in the classroom must hold one of these types of permits, either the site supervisor permit, master teacher permit, or teacher permit. And these permits are issued by the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. You heard me mention that we have classrooms on different campuses. So at any given campus, there must be at least one adult who holds a site supervisor permit. So if we have 3 classrooms at Marin, one person has to have a site supervisor permit, and the other 2 can have either master teacher or teacher permit. And then when restoring employees and recalling them, you have to do that in order of seniority. And so in the next slides, you'll see the staffing projections. They have taken into consideration all of these things. And so the costs that you see here are the actual costs of the employees who would be restored to these positions. And of course, it's costs, so it's salaries and all of the benefits. Those are statutory benefits and health and welfare benefits. So this slide here is the staffing that we would, potentially recommend if we were still doing distance or remote childcare. So if we were deciding to provide services to 60 students, we would restore 2 teachers and a half-time accountant secretary. If instead the board voted to provide services to 84 students, then you see the chart on the right where we would hire 2 teachers and 1 early childhood instructor, as well as the accountant secretary. And I just want to make a note here about the early childhood instructor. As I mentioned before, folks, all that's really required are the permits, right, when you're on campus. And so in this distance learning, we don't have enough information about what the permit requirements are. And I was looking at this, building this staffing projection with my HR lens, and I wanted to balance, the number of staff that we restored from our different bargaining groups. And so this is to try to maybe restore someone from CSEA after, focusing on our ATA folks. Next slide, please, Julie. Okay, so this staffing here is for in-person on campus. And the first, on the left is the staffing for 5 classrooms. And we used 3 at Marin and 2 at Cornell. What you'll see is that the classrooms would be staffed with 1 ACC teacher who holds the site supervisor permit, 1 early childhood instructor, and the 3rd classroom with the lead para. And these, again, have all met the permit requirements. We added another full-time para, specifically because we would anticipate there being a classroom dedicated to younger students, kindergarten, and maybe 1st grade. And so because they're the little ones, it was most appropriate to add a 2nd adult in that classroom. And then the final paraeducator would be like a roving floater paraeducator who to assist with breaking staff. At Cornell, 2 classrooms, and again, a classroom anticipating there being a need for TKK or 1st grade students. And so having a 2nd adult in that classroom, and then again, a roving para. In the chart for the 7 classrooms, it's the same staffing for Marin and Cornell. At the Ocean View campus, we would have 2 classrooms, which is what they had this last year. And that is the staffing there for the Ocean View site or campus. And I believe that is all for me. I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Business Official, Ms. Kim.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. If we can go to the next slide for the budget. Thank you. So this slide is just to reiterate how many students we need to earn the maximum contract, which is 48 students. So this is what it was used in our calculation for the budget. Next slide, please. So budget on this slide, we are assuming that we start with remote childcare starting August 25th, which aligns with our school reopening plan. And we will switch to a hybrid model on October 6th. So October 6th, the plan is our Superintendent Wells will reassess readiness for our reopening school. Then upon the decision from the board at October 13th board meeting, which is a week after October 6th, even though we are hoping to be able to open our schools as a hybrid, but that is the plan for maybe starting November 2nd. So they will give staff about 2 weeks to be ready for hybrid model. that means we will have about 48 days of the remote learning up to October 31st and 134 days of the hybrid model, which is also about 26% of remote learning and 74% of hybrid learning. So those are the assumptions it was calculated and built in these options. So let's look at option 1 and 2. So option 1 and 2 is for 5 classrooms. Meaning we will have all option 1. It says we have 100% of subsidized students, which are 60 students and 5 classrooms. Okay. So the state maximum contract of $465,150, and there won't be any family fees because it's going to be 100% subsidized families. And supply fees, again, $100 for 60 students. And the staffing here, so earlier you see the 2 staffing options. One is for the remote, one is for the in-person model. So 48 days of remote is calculated based on less staffing, and the other 74% is calculated on the in-person staffing. Okay. So not only this was built in, but also for the other costs, we prorated the based on the staffing. So for example, last year it was more about 27 FTE, and for the class of 5, we are gonna have about 8.4 FTEs. So all the costs are prorated either based on the staffing or based on the classrooms. Okay, another thing here is rental for 2 portables and marine will stay the same all the way through. Okay. So now we can move to option 2. So here, since we have 48 subsidized students, but we will have also 12 full paid families. So I'm capturing those family fees of 70,000 or 69,400. So then in the bottom line, we will have a less net loss for this program. Okay. So now let's look at option 3 to 6. So this is for the classrooms of 7. Option 3, we have 100% of subsidized families. We will still on the same amount of the state contract, which is 465,000. So this 465,000 is regardless of how many subsidized families we serve, we will still get the maximum of 465. Okay, so you don't see any family fees, little increase for the supplies fees from parents. But again, in salaries and benefits, you will see about 116,000 more because about 112,000 more due to 2 additional staffing we have for the 2 additional classrooms. And the rest of expenditures are also all prorated. And again, this model, we have 26% of remote, so it's little, it costs less than in-person model on the next slide. Okay, so option 4 is also 7 classrooms, but this one has now 1 classroom of full paid families, which you will see about 69,000 of family fees. And the rest of the expenditure stays the same from option 3 to 6. Now option 5, we are going to provide 2 classrooms for full paid families, which is 24 students. So you will see the family fees got doubled than option 4. Okay. So then again, we will have same cost. So the bottom line, the net loss will be less than the other options. Now option 6. So this is again, the most cost-effective one because we are earning our grant based on the full subsidized families of 48 students. Okay. And now here we have 3 classrooms of full paid students of 36 students. So this is the case that we are hoping to see that our priorities are for our staff, teachers, as we see that they will need childcare services to teach our students. So we hope to see that as our priority. So we also see that in this option 6, we have about over 200,000 family fees and the same expenditures. So in total, so for example, in option 6, you will see the net loss of 105,000. And you will see another line item, the next line item of 195,701. And this is, again, from the preschool program net loss in Director Ricci went over. So in total of those two, we will see, we're anticipating about 301,000 from the general fund contributions. Okay. And one thing I wanted to notice here, note here is that family fees are about 7,524 per family for a year. So that's how the math is calculated there. If we can move to the next slide. Okay, thank you. So the main difference here in this budget slide is that this did not eliminate the remote learning expenditures, meaning remote learning costs us less due to staffing. So this is really based on full 10-month in-person services. So as you can see, the costs are more than the previous slide. And again, I just wanted to show you, again, I wanted to talk about option 2 and 6 with the subsidized families of 48 students. This is the maximum number of students that we can earn our contract. Well, this is students that we can earn the maximum contract. And I'd like to take any questions. If not, then we can move to a board discussion.
I have a couple of questions.
Go right ahead.
All right, thank you. I was wondering if during this presentation, as you guys are putting this together and making these decisions, if there was any, if anybody was consulted from the medical community, you know, a doctor or a consultant of any kind, you know, as you're making decisions about like this amount of students or this person breaking this person, things like that. You know, kind of any guidance from, you know, a medical professional to say, oh, wait, you know, that will further transmit, or that's risky, or that's dangerous, you know, things like that as you're, you know, making those decisions. And then I'll throw in my other question, and then you guys can, you know, kind of take it, you know, on your, my other question is, if we're doing distance learning and there's no ratios for, or the ratios might be higher for distance learning, as for example, when the kids are in school, it's 12 to 1, right? You can't have more than 12 kids in a class and want to, you know, make that small and keep those kids and staff members safe. But if it's distance learning, then I'm assuming that those same smaller classrooms don't apply. So then will we be able to offer it to more students in the distance learning model, maybe 24 for each teacher instead of 12? Is this only based on the hybrid, or? So those are my two questions.
Trustee Doss, I appreciate your questions. The first one, we have been consulting our county health chief official. First it was Erica Pond, and then Governor Gavin Newsom took her from us in Alameda County, and now she's a state rep giving direction to people statewide. Now we have Nicholas Moss, Dr. Nicholas Moss, who is our chief county health official, and we run all this by him, adhering to the most recent guidelines. So again, the short answer is yes, we do consult with them before making these kind of moves, because again, they are, this is a health crisis. And so every step of the way, we have to get consultation from our health officials. As for your second question, will be something that the stakeholders will be grappling with our Assistant Superintendent Marie and Executive Director Alexia Ritchie, about, hey, and I think it came up to our Vice President Duran, can we do something different in terms of our ratio if we're doing remote learning or remote daycare kind of thing? And the short answer is yes, with the understanding that when we go hybrid, we're going to have to release some students. Because, for example, you might be able to go 1 to 30 or 1 to 24 remote learning, but you won't be able to bring that 24 back in hybrid learning. But as long as the families know ahead of time and are identified, I think that's a viable option.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson.
I had a couple of questions. One was to Assistant Superintendent. I'm trying not to be facetious, but childcare in remote, what does that look like? I mean, parents don't get to walk out the door and say, bye kids, your childcare provider is here. So honestly, what do we think it's going to look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say that, you know, for our families that are potentially interested in childcare, that we're sort of, that term childcare, right, we are using to mean something other than what it typically means. And I think for our families that are interested, it could entail, for example, some live Zoom time, right? My child last year has participated in Chinese school. So remote Chinese school was signing up for a Zoom session with the teacher in a small group and doing a lesson once a week. So that's what it might look like. But I know that sort of even beyond childcare in schools, many sort of like enrichment programs are taking their services online. And so, you know, I think if we think of it as like enrichment childcare, then actually I think for some families that would be like a welcome sort of addition to a child's day, right? So if kids are home all day and there is an opportunity maybe to Zoom into a small group and do some enrichment type activity, I think that's what we're thinking of. But certainly in the strictest sense, somebody is not now responsible for supervising your child. You still have to do that. But I think there are some benefits to the enrichment type activities that students would get from remote childcare.
The ones that you had like a schedule, and I don't know if it was the one that was used last spring, but it was a little bit, to me, on the academic side. I mean, enrichment certainly in terms of the Spanish and the Chinese program, but I'm wondering if, since we are in going to remote and the kids will be online for remote instruction, if the childcare component could be really quite different than the one that sample looked like, where it is more enrichment, more, you know, PE types of activities or other things that are a little bit more engaging than the kids sitting down and seeing a video?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think if, you know, we remember that in the spring, everybody shifted to a remote format. And so, you know, to move your teaching from a classroom to remote is one thing. To move your childcare from in-person to remote is sort of entirely another. And so I think this is where sort of the school age planning team will come in. And I think we can think about ways to provide a robust, engaging, and enriching program for students that includes some of the components you've talked about. And I think we can do that.
And maybe a last question, maybe, is for attendance. I saw that you weren't able to get attendance from the March on. Is that considered a requirement that the teachers are able to identify how many students are participating in the aftercare program, before care?
Yeah, so I am aware, I believe that logs were generated. I just wasn't able to get them in advance of this meeting, so that's information that might be forthcoming. But yes, I would say that logging attendance would be a piece of it. I think you know, participation. Somebody, a board member asked a question about participation and sort of, you know, what does participation mean? Does it mean that we reached out and you politely declined, or does it mean that you were engaged the whole time? So I think just sort of being clear about what that term participation means. Certainly as part of the remote work, we would need to be verifying at the very minimum that we were making contact with students, and we would do that. And if I'm able to capture that information, I'll be certain to pass it along.
Last question. I'm so sorry. Last question. Ms. Gonzalez mentioned it or referred to it, and I hadn't thought about that before. But given the limitation of slots for the childcare program, who's going to make that decision about which students, whether they're whether it's going to be a combination of paid and students that are on the contracts, or is it going to, who's going to make that decision? Because we have so many students that of course have been subsidized and that. So how do we do a delicate balance there, if at all?
Well, so we've presented these options to the board for the board to deliberate and give us direction in terms of sort of the composition of student enrollment. And then we would, to your earlier question, you know, determine a criteria and then admit students based on that criteria.
President Chutain, I'd like to take a moment to pause and be a little attentional right now. We've had student trustee Audrey Mala and student trustee Leo Carzo Clark with us for a few hours listening intently, and I can see that their wheels are spinning upstairs, and I would love to hear from them because they have some thoughts that might be very, very useful in having some input as we take what they have to say from a student perspective and weigh in on that as we move forward. I didn't want to miss that opportunity.
I would be happy to hear from them. But the first thing that we're going to need to do is I need a motion to extend the meeting. If you check the agenda, we had hoped to adjourn the meeting at 8:10, and it's 8:08 now. I feel sure that we're going to be discussing this for at least another half hour. So if a board member could make a motion to extend, then we'll do a roll call vote, and then we'll check in with our students.
I make a motion that we extend the meeting to 8:45.
I second.
Thank you. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Student Board Member Mala?
Yes.
Trustee Hinckley?
Yes.
Trustee Doss?
Yes.
Trustee Clark?
Yes.
Vice President Duran?
Yes.
And President Chutain?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for the extension. And student board members, please, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so one thought that I had in regards to what Vice President Duran said about who is really like picking and choosing what students get to fill up those limited availability slots is something that whoever's deciding that, whether it's on site or the like district administration, is that as we're keeping in mind with as we create the hybrid groups, is to make sure that siblings and students that are within the same household are on the same schedule, whether that's going to the same site or in the same class potentially, which both would just make that easier on families and less coordination that's burdened onto them, but also in a way safer for those students on that site, because having groups of if let's say there's 10 children in a class, if 2 of them are in the same household, then that makes the risk of infection half as much for that. And so I think that's an important thing to consider when deciding who goes where and who gets those limited slots.
President Trutain, that's just a small reminder of why it's so important to hear from our students. What an excellent point. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Wells, for giving us this time. I don't have a lengthy comment. Leo said it very well, but I think one thing that we should really focus on is making sure that families know as soon as possible the plan that's going to be used for each family, not just tonight, but to follow up on this. And because as Assistant Superintendent Williams said, you know, it can be a really anxious process, and that's something that should be emphasized.
Trustee Hinckley?
I have a few questions. One is, I guess, a scenario question of reiterating what I asked about the preschool, and I know you have this on your list of questions, but there's a possibility that our childcare program could be able to open in person, even though our K-12 instructional program is not permitted to reopen. How would that play into some of these scenarios, or how do we think about that for planning going forward? That would bring a sort of third model to these two tables of in-person childcare, even if we continue remote learning past October 6th. So I know you don't know yet whether the district would be able to offer childcare along with the Y and other private providers, but I just wanted to put that scenario out there as something that might happen and could help the families whose greatest need is, as Vice President Duran said, to be able to wave goodbye to their child and go to work, rather than having them get remote childcare. And that raises some other questions about that I wanted to ask about the budget, because I assume we're going to be asked to vote on these different options, which are mostly about how many kids we serve overall, and then what percentage of those kids are subsidized. So I have a few questions that I'll try to ask quickly, and then maybe Ms. Kim can explain some of it. So if I understand right, 48 kids for 6.5 hours a day of care is our full contract. If we move to a hybrid model, I'd like to know if we go back to hybrid, then kids wouldn't be getting 6.5 hours a day of childcare. They'd be in school part of the time. So I just wanted to understand how that played into your fee calculations, and also how it affects the contract if they're spending 5 hours of their day at school half of the week and then coming over. And then I'd like to understand if so we had 127 subsidized families before, I think you said, some partially, some fully. Is there any scenario in which we can serve more subsidized families in any of these different configurations, whether it's in person for part of the day with hybrid? You know, what are the other possibilities for increasing the number of subsidized families we can serve? I think option one is some variation of that, where we're serving 60 subsidized students instead of 48, but I didn't quite understand how that related to the contract. So I think a little bit more information about what the projections are based on for what kinds of fees parents would be paying in these different scenarios. And you know, the first question about what happens if, you know, fingers crossed, this is not what happens, but what happens if elementary schools are closed for 6 months instead of a month and a half? And so that we are providing full-time childcare for that whole period of time, does that affect these bottom lines at all? Or does this allow us the possibility of not transitioning to the hybrid model October 6th, which I think is a very real possibility? Would that affect the bottom line at all, or are these budgets how would that play out, I guess?
Before we get to Jackie, CBO's Jackie Kim, I want to go back to Trustee Hinckley, if you will, to your additional scenario that you described, and want to call your attention to scenario number 2 is the scenario that we believe you just described that's included in one of the our scenarios. So just an FYI, we have that one that we consider, and that would be your scenario number 2. So I hope that's helpful.
I mean, my additional scenario that I mentioned at the beginning was that we're allowed to offer in-person all-day childcare even while we're doing distance learning K through 12. If we're able, for example, to get a waiver for childcare, especially perhaps for essential workers and teachers, who I think would be the other priority group of parents, that I think that was the additional scenario. I may not have described that well.
Can I respond to that, Trustee Hinckley? So in the slides, it would be the last slide. This is a set of options where we can come on campus and provide all-day childcare beginning on August 25th, assuming we don't need a waiver or we got a waiver and all of the other assumptions that were built into this. So that is here. That's the last slide, in-person all-day childcare with transition to hybrid. So also assuming hybrid. And then the other piece, you had a question around what would our contract look like in a hybrid model, and could we earn the full contract? That was, again, one of the assumptions, because we've asked that question of the CDE, who are, and they're the folks who are going to give us the reimbursements. And we've asked that question, and the answer has been, we don't know. And we are hoping that we can get an answer to that. So these budgets assume that we are permitted to do that.
Got it. Yeah, I guess the scenario I'm trying to think about is, what if we can't go to a hybrid model on October 6th? How does that affect the bottom line here? Because if we approved one of these options now, we're assuming that we're coming back to a hybrid October 6th. And it would be helpful just to know, is that just going to be a marginal cost difference, or is it look more or less the same?
I want to interject. Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to interject that my understanding of this last slide is this is 10 months of in-person staffing. And so our staffing costs wouldn't go higher than this for the whole time period, because this assumes in-person staffing. So these numbers are the biggest hit that the budget would take, given these numbers of students that are listed. Is that correct, CBO Kim or Ms. Gonzalez, either one?
Sure, that is correct. Based on, but up to 84 students, either up to, we have a scenario here for either 60 or 84 students.
Would it be possible that on the revenue side, the family fees would be higher if they were, for example, if a family is getting 6.5 hours of care every day in this scenario before we go back to hybrid, and now their kids are in school half of the week, does this scenario account for a reduced number of family fees, such that if we weren't going back to hybrid, we would actually get more fees?
I think I understand your question. What's built in here is that parents, the full pay families would continue paying full fees for the remainder of the year, even if we went to a hybrid. Mm-hmm. So actually, to reduce those fees would mean that the bottom line would be, it would be a larger number, right? It would affect.
And is that what? So we would in fact charge families for 6.5 hours a day, even if their kids were in school for part of that time.
That's just what's built in here. If we
Okay, yeah, no, I'm not saying, I understand this is almost impossible to model. I'm just, for myself, I'm just trying to understand what are the sort of, you know, parameters on either end that we should keep in mind.
That was my understanding of one of the assumptions, is if when those students that are in the 3 remote days of their hybrid program, if they can actually be physically present in the before and after care, so that they are receiving childcare and they're receiving their learning. So that's how I interpreted one of those assumptions that that the staff is trying to check out with CDE to see if we could be reimbursed for those type of hours. So the child would be out of the house in one of these 5 or 7 classrooms that we're talking about, but would be doing the remote part of their education while being cared for by our before and after school staff.
That is correct.
So I just have one last question, which is, you're asking us, so we can't decide between these, you know, remote or in person, because that's out of our hands, but you want us to decide the number of kids that we're serving, and then how many of those will be subsidized. Is that what you're asking the board to vote on?
I think it's the opposite. We're responding to the board request for us to present options to the board for the board to consider. Typically, we would make a recommendation. And so we're just presenting, here are the options that we have before you. And as requested, the board is going to wanted to make the selection. And then we take that what selection they make and then dive into the how. And so so I guess the short task is we took what the board requested us to do and we put it here on the table. And it's a little different what we do traditionally, but here's the option. And so we wanted to try and adhere to what was requested of us. And so this is where we kind of fall back and the board grapple with, I'm assuming the next step, President Trutain, is the board grapple with the scenarios and then tell staff which one they want us to do, and we adhere to it and go back with our stakeholders group and make it happen by doing the how.
Well, I think that what Trustee Hinckley brings up is that, for example, the board could decide that our preference would be the in-person all-day childcare, but we're not in charge of all of those regulations. So, for example, the assumptions that were listed on the previous slide about that, that assumes that we don't need a waiver or that we can get a waiver, and that just assumes that we have our union's agreement that it's that they want to go back to in-person teaching, and there were just a whole list of assumptions on that. So the board could vote that that is our preference, but I understand that that may not be possible, and if so, then certainly we would fall back to the previous slide, which talked about just the remote learning before we're able to transition to in-person. So I see the board as being able to voice a preference there, and then the board certainly should be able to grapple with the number of classrooms and the percentage of subsidized and full fee.
Just on that, sorry, can we actually even decide how many subsidized students we're taking? So if the contract, for example, is filled once we serve 48 students full time, what does it mean for us to serve 84 students?
Well, okay, so I may need staff clarification here, but in terms of the subsidized students, I mean, we are facing severe limitations this year on how many students we're able to take. This is definitely a drop down from previous years. So I assumed that inherent in these assumptions was an existing list of people who have applied that would enable us to fill these slots as listed in the scenarios.
I have a
I
question.
think it's a little confusing because in the preschool, it seems that it follows a family, but here it seems that we can fill it with hours. So I guess as long as it's the case that there's some list of, so we used to have 81 fully subsidized students, that there's some list of 84 students that we could decide to serve and not let in any fee paying students. As long as that's something the board actually could have discretion over, that's fine. I'm just trying to understand how this interacts with the contract, or if the state will say, you know, here are your 40, these are the 48 students you can serve. And I guess it's just up to us. We can allow as many, we can serve as many other families for free as we want, as long as they meet the criteria for the state subsidy. Is that the case?
Right, but however, as you can see in option 1 and 2, the contract maximum amount we are getting from state is the same, meaning if we have more than 48 students, we wouldn't get any reimbursement. So we will have more net loss, serving more than 48 students full time.
I believe that, I believe that Trustee Clark spoke, and so we've got a number of people who, and Trustee Doss also has some questions. So let's hear from them.
Thank you, President Trutain. So of the 6 options, 2 of them have 5 classrooms and 4 of them have 7 classrooms. Is there anything from stopping us from doing 8 classrooms, or?
So currently our childcare programs in person operate in 7 classrooms. And so one of the considerations is, you know, if we begin remotely, certainly maybe classrooms are open. And so we might have a thought to expand in-person childcare to those empty classrooms. However, once students and teachers start returning to campuses, those classrooms would not be available. And so all of our assumptions assume that we don't exceed our current childcare facilities capacity, which between our 3 sites is 7 classrooms. So that's why 7 is the maximum number of classrooms you see utilized.
Additionally, doing remote learning, we may have teachers who need access to their classroom to teach via Zoom and other educational platforms as well.
So in the past, 7 has been the maximum, not 8?
Yes, 7 is the number of classrooms that we, prior to closing schools, 7 is the number of classrooms that we were using for childcare.
Was there any additional classrooms that could have been used?
No, 7 was the maximum number available to us.
Thank you.
My question is related to that. So I think it's 19 on the slideshow there, page 19. If we have it available to bring back up, but the first part of it talks about 2 of the sites, Marin and Cornell, and then on the other option there, it's Marin, Cornell, and Ocean View. So I'm wondering about the differences between these 2 and like how we determine that.
So really, it was just random. Marin, because there were already 3 classrooms in use. So it made sense to say, okay, well, Marin, they have the most capacity in terms of facility. And for Cornell and Ocean View, really, we just picked a site. So if we were choosing to offer just a 5 classroom program, we just picked a site.
Oh, okay. So if we chose the 5 classrooms, then the 3 elementary schools would be split amongst the 5 classrooms. And if we chose 7, it would be split amongst the 7. Okay.
President Chuchain? I have a clarifying, well, just a question. I wonder, would it be helpful to the board after we entertain questions from the public to have a recommendation from staff that might help guide the discussion for making the selection of the scenarios that we have in front of us. I'm just saying that to let you know we have options, but it's a preference of the board collectively in terms of how to hone in on a decision and some direction for staff.
Let's see, I'd like to check in with all of our trustees and make sure that there's no further questions from our trustees at this time. And then we can move to public comment. Then we'll bring it back to the board so that we can vote on these different options. At this time, trustees, any further questions?
Another follow-up question based on what we were just talking about. So it's not. You said that it was random. I guess my my thinking behind it is that if we were to choose one or the other or make the decision based on what was there, it appears as if one school is being left off, and then if we are choosing between those, like if one school has more students who use subsidies than the other, like how are we making the decision to? I just want to make sure that the one school isn't being left out, and we're making the decision based on student need and not being random.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we wouldn't, as we thought about the 2 sites versus 3 sites, the sites would be available for all students to access. So it wouldn't be that only Marin students could go to Marin and Cornell students could go to Cornell. And certainly we would be thinking in terms of prioritizing about the need district-wide as we made a decision, and not separating out Marin subsidized families getting priority for Marin or Cornell families getting priority for Cornell. So all families would be considered district families, and then we would establish the priority from all students. And so the sites would be where they would be assigned, but it was not our intention to leave off Ocean View students at all, or leave off any students.
Just what about the Mandarin and the Spanish programs? How does that figure into these scenarios?
That's a good question. As we shared with the Mandarin teacher and the Chinese teacher, those are programs you can do remotely because they're more academic, and they're generally fee-based programs and highly sought after, at least especially the Chinese program, highly sought after. Once we get into the how, and a human resource officer, Marina Gonzalez, has been working and doing additional research around here. But once we get into the how with our stakeholders, we're going to hone down how we going to do that. But we do have parents who are highly interested and will participate in those programs remotely.
But would they come out of those 7 classrooms if we did the in-person?
So let's see. So the Mandarin and Spanish programs were already included in the 7 classrooms. And so when we are, and so those are programs that the Children's Center staff, the director and previous directors have worked hard to to implement and add a great value to the programs, to the before and after school program. And I'm just going to give a little shout out here. My daughter went to the Cornell Chinese School from kindergarten through 5th grade, and now she's taking Mandarin in college. So I have a great deal of appreciation for that program. But okay, that aside, when we are looking to staff the classrooms, we are calling folks back in order of seniority and in those classifications. And so at the Albany Children's Center School Age Program, the Albany, what we call the ACC teachers, it's just one classification. It's not tied to Mandarin or Spanish. Those, those just happen to be the programs that are there, but the classification of the position is just ACC teacher. And so we would have to restore those folks with the highest seniority. We wouldn't be able to, then we would have to make a decision about whether we wanted to maybe dedicate one of those classrooms specifically for that program, but then we'd have an issue with staffing and seniority and that sort of thing. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And how does it interact with the state contract if most of those students, particularly for the Mandarin program, are fee paying? Can subsidized students also participate in those programs?
Yes, it just so happens to break out that way, that the students that have enrolled in those classrooms at that site in that program are full pay. But here, what we would be saying is, let's say we want to go with the 7 classroom option. We are going to offer 7 classrooms of childcare, and we are going to prioritize, this X number of subsidized families and X number of full pay families. It may not be that the folks who were enrolled specifically in the Chinese program before this, they might not end up with a spot. We did hear that from one of our planning meetings, our teachers said, well, we've had parents reach out to us and say that they might be interested in a remote offering, right? Of receiving instruction in Spanish or in Mandarin remotely, and maybe even be interested in paying for that instruction. I think personally that is something worth exploring, but that would be outside of or separate from these 5 or 7 classrooms that we are wanting to dedicate to childcare.
Trustee Doss?
I have a 2-part question, and I want to start with the premise of, if you need time to research and get back to me on the answers, I completely understand. The first part of the question is, have there been discussions or talks around, would we maintain the contracts and what things would look like budget-wise if we weren't to offer before and after care until we're actually able to provide it in person for its intended purpose? The reason why I ask that is because when I think about before and after care, I think about being a parent, needed to drop my kid off before school so that I could go and do whatever things I needed to do. And then not picking and then sending my child to aftercare because I either wasn't off work yet or had things that I needed to do. If student, I don't want to make a certain group, anything that the parent had to do where their student was at that aftercare. And so when I think about before and after care, I think about it exactly like that. Before school care for my child, where I know they're safe while I go handle my business, and aftercare, where again, I know that they're safe while I go and handle the things that I handle. So my question is, have we explored, or what does it look like if we do that? or if we don't do that, and like would those contracts still remain in place, then those families that do need that essential care can go to the facilities that are actually open for in-person and use that subsidy that they're receiving from the state to pay the person who's actually going to physically be watching their student while they're handling their business. The second part of my question is, are we able to postpone or push this vote until we have concrete answers on those 3 questions that Chief Human Resource Officer Marina pointed out we didn't have answers to yet, but we're pending? Because in my opinion, it's really hard for me to make a decision on this without having the answers to those questions. So that's my 2-part question, and you know, I understand it's a lot of information.
So we do have guidance from CDE that, so to your first question, Trustee Doss, about could we maybe hold off on implementing the contract until such time as we could provide in-person before and after care. That's your question? Yeah, and so we do have guidance from CDE that we must commence providing services by September 8th or within 21 days of the district's approved program calendar, whichever is sooner. And so given that we are have identified a date of October 6th, where the superintendent would be assessing a readiness for reopening, and then maybe a month later, potentially, you know, fingers crossed that worked out and we were able to open in a hybrid model, that would put us outside of the window for needing to commence services. So we couldn't hold off until October or November to provide those in-person before and after care services. We would have to begin providing them sooner in order to maintain our eligibility to earn those contracts.
What's the date that we would need to?
September 8th or within 21 days of the district's approved program calendar, whichever is sooner.
Oh, okay. How do we know which is?
We are interpreting it the first day of the district's approved program calendar. I am interpreting to mean the first day of school, so August the 25th.
In addition to that, Trustee Doss, we need to be provided direction on the what so that we can start working on the how and be ready to provide those services. And just wanted to highlight that piece.
Okay, I think that it might be time to move to public comment. There are some of our community members with their hands raised.
Okay, so I will be allowing folks to talk, and just as a reminder that you'll have to unmute yourself when you get on so that we can hear you. And our first public speaker is Miriam Walden.
So I just want to point out to the board that it is very difficult for folks to participate tonight, partly because we have a number of staff who are no longer employed, and it's difficult for them to participate in this kind of a public discussion in front of their former bosses and feel like they can really talk. And so it's important that those task force meetings happen where people are more able to participate. And it's important to recognize that those task forces are now happening, those stakeholder groups, as you call them, are now happening with folks who are not paid and not receiving benefits, and it's difficult. But I want to urge the board to approve a motion tonight to move to in-person care for our families as soon as possible, to use the maximum number of classrooms possible. And I think that the question about the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized families gets resolved by the priorities that the state has dictated. When subsidized families are offered a slot, they have to choose how much they want, and you can only offer paying services when you have leftover space. So I think that the division between subsidized and unsubsidized parents is actually not something the board could decide on tonight, and that you would just decide to maximize the use and to prioritize the subsidized families, and the rest kind of falls from what the subsidized families choose. It should be pointed out that for equity reasons, it's really necessary to acknowledge that the Chinese and Spanish programs are equal to and of equal importance to the Tupelo program, that in that the kind of arts and culture and enrichment that happens there is valuable, and that families should be able to choose from amongst them, and that we shouldn't speak of them as more or less in this kind of a forum. And the last thing I want to say is that the board really needs to direct the superintendent with regards to the meaning of the word partnership that you will accept. And so if it's not the board's wish that our programs become privatized, the board should instruct the superintendent tonight that our space, our taxpayer-funded spaces, and our state contracts would not be shared with other programs, that working together with other programs to mutually serve the community is good, but allowing public product to become privatized should not be acceptable to this board. And I would ask you to direct the superintendent in that way so that the word partnership can be clear going forward.
Thank you. Appreciate your input, Miriam.
Our next speaker is Gal Wish.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, since I think that I'm a current a parent of a student who went to the Mandarin school, and if the school would be remote, my son would not be interested in enrolling. But if it would be in person, he will. He was a kindergarten student, and it didn't work for him to be in a remote learning environment. So how, I mean, and I assume that some parents think the opposite. If it is remote, they would be interested in enrolling, and if it would go in person, they would not. So how would you plan on implementing that for families?
Thank you, Ms. Wish.
Our next speaker is Stephen Naif. Hi, Stephen.
Hi there. So I'm Stephen Naif. I'm ATA co-president, and good evening to you all. Just a quick statement and then two questions actually on the budget. So the first statement was that I really appreciate the district in their task force and stakeholder meetings. I think they're marvelous. I will say it was a missed opportunity. I think that some of the previous staff could have put some information towards the what of what needs to happen. So that said, there are two things that, looking through the presentations, I was a little I was confused by. It seemed the first presentation that for the ACC preschool, that it was only about $80,000, or it was $80,000 or so that would have to come out of the general fund. And yet in the second presentation, during the budget implication slides, the net income loss was $195,000 from ACC preschool. So I just, just wanted to see if they could get some clarification as far as that goes. And then briefly, the second statement would be that the other point would be that there was an accountant secretary of $42,000. That I don't think that's a new person, and I'm wondering if the district is that person has been hired for the district, and then ACC has those funds taken out to help pay for that person. In which case, my question would be, how is that figured out so that it is commensurable with, say, how many people are in the program, or if that can be modified anyway to help our ACC programs. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Naif. For clarity, I wonder if we can go back to slide 9 from our preschool update presentation to clarify the costs. This would be in the preschool presentation, so the first presentation. So we can see how the number was built for the contribution necessary from the general fund to run the preschool this coming year.
So the net income shows on this page 9 is 195,000. So this is really the general fund contribution for the preschool program. So then this number is also showing at total of with the preschool program and the childcare program in the other presentation.
Okay, my apologies. I thought that was on a different slide. So thank you for clarifying.
No problem.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Stephen Bailey.
Hi, first of all, thank you for your leadership in this. These are difficult choices and I appreciate your careful consideration of this. I wanted to ask or suggest that whether the considerations for hybrid or remote or in-person are being considered differently for different ages. I imagine younger kids, in-person, the childcare aspects might be more important, and for older kids, the remote enrichment might be more viable. Or building on one of the earlier speakers, it might be that just different families have different levels of comfort of being in person or not. And so offering both options might be a way to serve more families, retain more staff, increase your budget by doing more, having, even if some are coming back in person, offering some by remote still, and doing both of those. So thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Eric Bieber.
Hi, thanks for giving me the chance to comment. Just a couple suggestions and then a bigger principle that I hope the board would take into account. First, remote learning might be helpful for parents who are working from home. I understand the discussion about needing to help parents who have to leave the house to work, but there may be circumstances in which parents could benefit from remote learning, focused childcare, or after-school services when they're working at home. And that opens the possibility of continuing some form of the remote learning after in-school hybrid education begins. And that might allow the district to serve more students through the childcare program. If some students can be served through remote learning, which obviously require less staff than the in-person, they don't have the same health concerns. Second suggestion is I'd strongly encourage the district to consider additional fee changes to make serving additional students more feasible. I think given the lack of options in the community, there will be parents who are willing to sacrifice more to make sure that these programs are available and can continue to serve families in this community. And then lastly, I just would encourage the board and the district to really think about the obligation to ensure that this infrastructure through the Children's Center is maintained for future years to serve future children. There's a national crisis occurring around childcare because so many programs are closing as a result of the restrictions on service and people not being able to pay for childcare and childcare providers not receiving income. And that's resulting in a lot of opportunities closing. And it would be a real unfortunate outcome if we lost a really vital public service that we have here in Albany that's continued for many years and can continue for many years to come. And so even if it's serving only a limited number of students, but it allows us to maintain our staff, it allows us to maintain the program, allows us to maintain the experience and expertise of the members of our childcare system here in Albany. Maintaining that for this year through this crisis is going to pay dividends for many families for many years to come. And I strongly urge the board and the district to make sure that that happens. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last speaker
is Sarah Bly.
Hi, my name is Sarah Bly, and I have two very young children who are in the district. And I think a goal of this really needs to be how
many children can we serve on site? How many children can, we keep talking about this virtual idea, and I've spoken to a few parents about it, and maybe there are some parents who are interested in that, but most of the ones I've spoken to kind of thought that was not an option they were particularly interested in. And this is something I'm speaking to parents of younger children who are working and who have a real need. And so I don't want to speak about the why as privatization. I want to speak about the why as a community partner that can help us. I want to think about the ACC as another option. And I want to look at our campus as more than 7 rooms. We have a campus with a lot of spaces that there are camps running right now outside very safely that parents feel very good about having their children in. So I hope we're thinking really expansively about this and how we can serve as many families as possible of all different need levels, because this is going to be a crisis. It's a crisis for working moms. I can say that very specifically. And it's a crisis for a lot of different families to have all virtual learning this coming semester. And so I really hope we think bigger and beyond what I feel like we're thinking right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bly. Okay, board, before we have our discussion and our decision-making process, we're going to need to extend the meeting further. We passed the 8:45 extension that we voted on previously.
There's still a person with their hand raised in the.
Oh, there's still a hand raised. Okay, could we go ahead and extend the meeting since we are over, and then we'll go back to our last public comment?
I'll move that we extend the meeting to 9:30.
A second.
And may we have a roll call vote, please?
Student Board Member Mala. Student Board Member Mala, is she still here?
She had to go to another meeting.
Oh, okay, thank you. So I'll mark her as absent. Trustee Doss.
Yes.
Trustee Clark.
Yes.
Vice President Duran.
Yes.
President Trutain.
Yes.
And Trustee Hinckley.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so our meeting is now extended until 9:30, and we'll return and have, if we have this one last public comment before we bring it back to the board.
Our speaker is Wilson. Just one name.
Hi, thanks for calling on me. This is Maria Wilson. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk. I just wanted to really echo everything I heard from Sarah and also Eric. I was really disappointed watching the presentation tonight that, when I looked at Marin, my daughter's at Marin, okay, there's only an option for 36 kids, right? As part of your presentation tonight. And so when I looked at it, I'm like, okay, do I leave the district? Do I have to move? There's literally no options, or there seem to be, to me, no options for parents who are working. And in planning what we're going to do for school next year, it's outrageous. It's like, I'll take her to work under the radar sometimes, and sometimes I'll be able to work from home, and my husband's dragging her around the state because there's no childcare options. And it's just absurd that, the options that are being presented here are just for a very limited number of families anyway. And so, for parents who are both working and working by choice, or not by choice, by necessity, sorry, I wouldn't work if I had to work by choice. It's really disheartening to see that the options for the fall will be virtual and very necessarily limited. And so I do, want to encourage, as Sarah did, thinking about creative partnerships with other facilities and spaces in Albany to actually provide parents who have little ones who I can't leave her alone for virtual childcare. That's not a thing, like Clementina Duran said. That is not a real thing. And so I would hope you would be realistic in thinking about the needs of families in the district. And I mean, I dream of leaving the state now because of the limited options that are being presented here. So thanks.
Thank you for your comment. Board, that brings it back to us. The superintendent has asked for our guidance on these options. I'm not sure exactly how you want to approach this. I think that there are a couple of things possible. The two big differences that we've been presented with on slides 21 and 22 are either preferring the return to in-person childcare or the remote childcare option. So I don't know if we want to deal with that choice first, although as the district said, there are some assumptions in the in-person, and it's possible we may not be allowed to do that. Or if you want to move straight toward looking at the various options that are presented on each slide. If anybody has a strong preference, please go ahead and voice it. And anybody can make a motion at any time.
Maybe we can grapple briefly with the remote versus in-person, just because maybe we could get some clarity on it. So assuming there's a universe in which in-person is a possibility, my preference would be to do in-person as soon as it's possible and safe, and that we have the committee working on it and so forth. I don't know if there are board members who feel otherwise, but maybe we can grapple with this question just because it seems simpler to me than the budget question, even though we don't even know whether it's a possibility. But knowing whether there's a board majority that would oppose in-person childcare would probably be useful for staff at this point.
I think that's a really good point. There are schools that are open now where kids are going and being dropped off. What's the difference between the program that we have and the willingness of the staff in place? What's stopping us from doing what those programs are doing that are serving people in need right now? Because we're having, I'm not sure what people are doing right now. I can only imagine. I'm not sure like what people, once we shut down and we weren't doing any in person and haven't been doing any in person, kind of like what those families were doing. I'm not sure what they're doing. Maybe they're just like hanging on and just trying to figure it out until we figure it out. What I would like to see is touching base with those programs that are currently open now, figuring out how they got open, what waivers are needed, what safety and safety precautions we need to put in place so that we can also be in that essential realm and then truly serve essential families. I'll just go out, I'll go out and say that I don't really see, I see that there might be some benefit, but if we're thinking about when school starts, we're going to be asking kids to hop online and be remote all day. And then after that, we're going to then ask those kids to hop online and then have an additional like remote. I mean, that's like a lot of screen time. So that feels a little overwhelming to me to have like, we want you to be in school and then after school, we want you to do more Zoom, which, I mean, I understand what that parent was saying. Like it could be really good to like have something else for the kid to do while I'm like working, but that's like a lot of screen time. So I'm wondering if we can figure out how the schools that are currently open right now are open, what things we need to put in place to be on the same track that they are, and then to open and actually have space available for parents that need it.
I'll follow up and just say that in agreeing with the two trustees that have already spoken, I think put it on the staff to, when you find time to be creative, maybe to go out and look at, as Brian is suggesting, other programs that are existing and functioning, and really see what is possible, beyond the criteria that the state provides for us. And I know you've been working really hard and pushing and asking the questions that they always respond, we don't know. But I think just in terms of trying to push the envelope a little bit and seeing, okay, but if we do get it, what other things might we be able to do? I think remote childcare is a misnomer, and I'm not going to say it anymore, even use that term. But that's why I really think we have to go to in-person childcare as soon as possible. And if staff, like I said, can try to reach out and see what else is out there. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but that's maybe possible for all these parents that we hear from that really need support.
Something. I want to remind everyone about one of the assumptions that was, or conditions that need to be met in order for us to be able to provide these services.
We can't hear you.
Oh.
It's kind of garbled.
Okay, how about now? Okay. Thank you. What I was saying was I just want to remind everyone about one of the assumptions or conditions that was in that long list of conditions that need to be met in order for us to run these programs. And key to this is that we are able to flex this contract and provide services during a time when a student might have their school day. So right now the school day is scheduled to be a distance learning, right? And so in order for us, what I'm trying to say is that we need that flexibility and we need that guarantee that we can earn that contract of $465,000, because if we don't have that guarantee and we move to providing childcare services without that guarantee, what we are gambling with is the risk that we will then have to absorb that $465,000 in addition to what you see as the total net income loss. So that is, we absolutely have to have that answered before we can move forward.
Could you just, I guess, clarify what the scenario is that you're worried about? For example, if the board was to recommend that we offer or make vote to offer in-person childcare as soon as possible to as many kids as we can, while earning the full contract, there's a possibility that that could be done in the way that you map out with 48 full-time students, but at a minimum, we'll be able to earn the contract by offering care from, let's say, 2 to 6 or 3 to 6, or we could always, I guess, fall back on what we did in a normal school year, right? And earn the contract, or?
Right. We would go back to what we did traditionally.
Which would be not satisfying for parents, but it would be a lot more than any of us are getting right now.
Yes, I personally, I think that we would have to survey families again and say, after distance learning, right, in your school day, do you need childcare from 3 to 6? And see what kind of commitment we would get from families then.
And keep in mind, I think it was Trustee Dawes who just mentioned that parents are in need, the community is in need. A couple of parents I heard tonight, I think echoed what Trustee Dawes said, is that they need a space and a place for kids to be all day, for example, 7:30 to 6. And that would be really ideal in terms of how we respond to our parent needs. But we can go the other way and under the auspices of this is better than nothing. Or we can also go, hey, let's try to service as many families as we can through all day care with some, part-time spots as well as full-time spots. So I guess the issue becomes, do we do all we can? And if we're doing all we can, it would be looking at the kind of all-day services that we probably could provide for a lot of families. But that is the board call, but I want to put that out there.
Can I ask one related thing on the part day? So Marina, if we though could only fulfill the contract by offering care from 2 to 6 p.m., then now we have a physical capacity problem. Is that right? Because to serve the number of students we would need to fill the contract, if we can only offer care from that. Do you know what I mean?
I don't know, right, because then we wouldn't be offering.
If we have the 12-to-1 ratio. It's the same issue we're having with the preschool, I guess.
Right, and we wouldn't be offering, in that scenario, 2 to 6 is only 4 hours. And so we wouldn't be meeting the 6.5-hour full day. So we would need to provide subsidized services to more students in order to earn it, right? Mm-hmm.
I have a quick interjection, which Trustee Hinckley, I think if a motion was phrased the way that you just started, your previous comment, that we return to in-person care as soon as possible, serving as many students as possible while earning the full contract, I think that would give the district office your will. We'll see if other people agree with that. And it would also give them the flexibility to make sure that we fulfilled that state contract. And then I believe I saw that Trustee Clark wanted to speak.
Yeah, thank you, President Trutain. Just quickly, I think Ms. Gonzalez said something about possibly another survey. I'm not sure if we're already doing this, but in the future, if our surveys and communications can be translated to our families, that would be wonderful. I don't know if that's happening now, but that's a request. And then also back to Board Member Hinckley's suggestion. I like it. I just don't know if it's clear enough. Like, we have options on the table, and to just say to reach as many kids as we can and as many classrooms as we can and in person, that's not clear direction, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can clarify. I just meant it as the first motion of what I assume will be several through the evening, so that we can deal with some of the, first of all, the option 1 through 7s, and then the some of the other issues that have come up around what collaboration means and so forth. So I meant this just to resolve the remote versus in-person scenarios in those 2 slides. But I'm happy to wait as well if people would rather add all of the rest of it into one motion.
And thank you. I agree with what you're saying.
I just wanted to mention something, and I'm sure, well, I'll say it even though I think staff has probably dealt with it already, is on the slide 3 for the school age program. It says care for school age children during non-school hours and temporary emergency childcare. Well, if anything's emergency, it's been COVID, and I don't know if the state would allow us to use flexible hours given that we're in an emergency childcare state, if that's been explored as a way of explaining to the state why we want to be open like all day long.
Yes, I would say that is a question that we have asked directly around flexing that language in the ed code, and we have yet to receive an answer from CDE, but we have asked that question directly.
I heard from the board, I heard from a majority of the board that they were interested in having us move to in-person before and after school care as soon as possible. So I actually think that you know, we've already heard that. We heard from 3 trustees and they were strongly in favor of that. So I think that we're already looking at slide 22, and we can talk about the number of people that, the number of classrooms or the number of children that can be served. I do think that we should keep that phrasing while earning our full contract. I think will be part of any motion that I would vote for, because I think it's really important that we maintain our full contract with the state.
Can I add one more thing, President Trutain?
Sure, go ahead.
This is just me as one board member, but I would also like some language in there that states that we're not going to privatize these services.
Okay.
I don't quite know what that means. Can somebody clarify that? I mean, I understand what private services are, but it seems that if there are no other public entities other than the school district for childcare, then it seems to me that in terms of trying to address the need of parents, that we would look at all and every component of childcare programs. It's not so much at this point to me, a philosophical question or a political question. It's more about the needs of the community at this time. And so I feel that we definitely should be looking at all and every and knocking on every corner, you know, on every door to see what else is possible. I know some students were talking about the possibility of providing childcare, and I'm not saying that's the job of the district to even go anywhere there, but just in terms of our being really open and creative and trying to push all the envelopes to come up with whatever resources we have in our community, including the Y, which has been a great service for many of our families.
I think one thing that might help is to be clear about what does it mean to use district resources to support a non-district program, even if it serves our families. I think it's a little blurry because we do allow the Y to lease space on our campuses already to provide childcare, and they've done that for a long time. Outdoor space and multi-purpose rooms, and I don't know whether the intent is to expand their ability to use our space, but I guess one way I would think of phrasing it is that we're not going to use district resources to subsidize private programs running childcare programs, that we want to keep serving as much of the population of students that we've been serving as we can, which doesn't mean that we would not encourage our families to participate in these other programs, since we can't possibly serve all the families that need it, but just that we hold the line at using district resources to support private programs. Our community, you know, funds the district through taxes and other things so that we run the programs, not so that other entities do. So I don't know if a statement about how our space is used, you know, if we're told we have the capacity to serve 7 classrooms and then we find out that we're allowing the Y to lease additional classrooms to serve our families, that would be troubling to me. So how do we maybe spell this out a little bit more clearly?
I'd like to see, maybe we can meet in the middle. And the reason why is because there's private programs that are open now and we're not open, but maybe like we'll do like another week or so of research and they might say, for this reason or that reason, you guys aren't able to open like those other programs. And then if we pass something that says we can't even work with those other programs, then we don't have anything to offer our families who still, regardless, still need something. So I wouldn't want to close the door on that, but would like to say that have some language that says if we use other programs, you know, not using the resources and having that be a second option, but the first option being if AUSD can provide this for families, because as Trustee Hinckley mentioned, I think families would be a lot more comfortable with that. These are the people that they know. These are the people that they're comfortable with their kids being with. But we have to provide the service for the families before we tell somebody else that they can't. So I think that we, if we can have some language that says that, I think that will help get us over the hump here a little bit.
Yeah, a lot hinges here on the fact of whether or not we're allowed to run programs. And certainly if it were the case that the district was not allowed to run in-person childcare, but that a private entity, I don't know how the Friendship Club would figure into that as a public entity that's not a school district, and which has never used our space before. But I agree, I don't think we want to back ourselves into a situation where nobody can use our campus in person. I suspect that, well, there's no reason to speculate. I think we just need to understand when we might find out an answer to that so that the board can sort of think about when we can make a decision around that.
I wanted to bring us back to the in-person childcare options. Does the board want to talk about whether we prefer the 5 classrooms or the 7 classroom model? I personally feel like it's important that we serve as many families as possible while not taking too big a bite out of the general fund, because we are still in straitened circumstances as a district. So when I look at slide 22, the 2 options that have the least impact on the general fund are options 2 and option 6. And they're only $10,000 apart, and one of them serves 84 students and the other only serves 60. So so I would think that option 6 would help our community and our students the most.
I second that motion.
Can we get clarity on the question that Miriam asked about whether once 48 families or students enroll, and presuming everybody's at either 6.5 hours or not, is option 6 clearly an option for us, that we serve 48 subsidized families and then we can serve 36 full fee families? Or would we be required to accept more subsidized families is sort of what she was suggesting.
So I would say, well, we will, the district responsibility is that we will do our best to earn the maximum contract amount, and we will. But for example, if we are providing services for about 3.25 hours, then we will have 96 subsidized families to earn the maximum contract. So this 48 is the number that we use based on 6.5 hours. So it could be more if we don't have students who would like to get service for 6.5 hours full time. Did I answer your question? So this number can vary, but we will maximize the contract.
So if a family qualified for, sorry,
Go ahead, Sarah. I was just comparing it to FTE. It's like 48 full-time students or some mix.
Right. But it means that it will be still 12-to-1 ratio, because one student will come from, well, 9 to 12, and the other student from 12 to 3:30, something like that, divided by 6.5 hours in between. If we can serve more students, that's something that we'll have to look at our priorities and the state guidelines and see which students we can have.
President Trutain, just clarification, or maybe I may have misunderstood something, so I would need your help here. Jacob, I thought, Trustee Clark, I thought I heard him say a second. What was that for?
I thought President Trutain made a motion.
You know, I don't think I made my motion quite clearly enough. I would like to restate, you know, although the board is welcome to continue to discuss, okay, which is I move that the district prioritize before and after the school age program to in-person, with starting that as soon as possible in the option 6 configuration, making sure that we earn the maximal contract as a priority, and that we do not privatize our any of our contracts. So that would be my motion.
That was well stated, and I will second that.
Thank you. If there's any questions or clarifications, or if anybody wants to add to that, please.
I would like to, two things. One is a clarification, a question for Ms. Kim. When you said we would honor the contracts, isn't it more than what we see here? 84, isn't there? How many contracts do we have with the state?
Oh, so when you say contract, we only have one contract for before and after school program and one contract for preschool program. So when we refer to contract, that really means the contract between the state and the district office or the district.
Okay, thank you for that. And I guess my second comment is, this is a philosophical comment about serving the needs of our community. And, you know, I feel that the people that have paid the biggest price, we all have paid a big price with COVID, but the ones that continually do are our poorest families. And I feel that we need to offer them the fullest possible program for childcare. Many of them are essential workers, and they have no choices. And we can see that by the number of essential workers and people of color in particular that have been getting sick because of COVID. And so I feel that that's why I'm not really in agreement with providing. I mean, I wish we could, like prior to COVID, and someday we'll get there again. But until such time as we're able to move away from this horrific situation, I feel that we really do need to address the needs of the parents that really have limited resources, and that means the parents whose children are in subsidies. And so that's why I would be against, that's why I would not vote for this motion.
Yeah, so with option 6, if more than 48 subsidized families need care or apply, would the room be made available for those families? I'm assuming that the state contract says that you have to provide care for the subsidized families and that they are a priority. But I guess we're like trying to get more clarification for that. But I don't feel comfortable voting on the motion that doesn't allow for additional families to be able to, if like I said, if it's less than that, or if it's that number, then you know that makes sense. But if there's more families in need, and we have this cutoff, and then we tell those families, well, we're at our number, good luck. I'm not really. That doesn't feel right there. So, is there a way to Or is there already wording in that that would prevent that from happening?
I mean, I think you're proposing option 3, which is we serve as many subsidized families as fit into the classrooms.
Right, but then
because I'm sure there would be 84. The issue is that the issue is just that we'd have to be willing to spend that money.
Right, and then it eliminates. Then would that eliminate the spots for the full fee families, which we also don't want to do that either. So I guess my question is, option 6 could be an option, but if we get to a point where there are families in need, then I would want something in there that will allow for us to be able to figure that out and serve those families as well.
I have a suggestion.
Go ahead.
Yeah, to follow up on Trustee Doss's suggestion is, would it be possible if we opened up more than 7 classrooms?
I thought I heard Assistant Superintendent Williams say that those are the only classrooms that are available.
Well, I heard that that's what we did in the past, but in these extreme times, I would have to kind of get some clear reasoning on why we couldn't open up additional classrooms.
Trustee Clark, that's a great question. That would mean using classrooms that are already assigned to teachers. And those teachers may need to have their classroom available for remote learning use. And so it get kind of dicey at that point.
Yeah, I feel you. I just hear what Trustee Doss is saying. You know, I think we're all trying our best here to accommodate as many folks as we can. So it was just a thought. Thank you.
What about the 2 TK classrooms at ACC?
That's the same concept, just so the board knows. And just kind of reiterate that the revenues that we get that are generated for our TK-12 programs are designed for those programs. What it sounds like the board is about to do is fund through that general fund the after school and before school and the preschool program. And so the issue becomes how much of the general fund you want to use to do that. Every time you open up another classroom and the way the revenues go, that means hiring more staff and doing a cost analysis and see how much more you're going to be impacting the general fund. And then at some point, full disclosure, we have to discuss what does that mean for programs that were targeted in the general fund. Do we start reducing those programs? And I'm hoping those programs don't unintentionally be programs such as our interventions and those kinds of things. So I just want us to be very thoughtful about the impact of utilizing general fund to fund state funded programs like before and after school. And I understand it's COVID and may only be a 1-year deal, but we do need to be cognizant of that.
I think that's important because when we do go back to in-person, it would be our responsibility as the education of the students. And if we spend money on the before and after care, and then we have to cut from the actual, from the classroom or close to the classroom because we're funding the before and after care, I'm not sure that is fiscally responsible of the board because we are the Board of Education and in charge of the education of students. And so we need to keep that in mind. Is there a way to put like a cutoff or have like a certain amount to where we can feel comfortable that it's not gonna affect students in the classroom when we go back to, or affect our ability to provide a high level distance learning model for the actual class teaching that, you know, I wouldn't want the before and after care to take away from the goal, which is to provide the best distance learning option for the students August 25th?
Well, Trustee Doss, full disclosure, and just in case people missed it in the presentation, it's doing that. But we're hoping it's a one-time shot. So the issue becomes, for me, just to give you another angle, and some people may not want to hear this, but I think you need to have all perspectives and deal with the facts. And that is one way to avoid impacting the general fund with our preschool and our after-school program is to work within the financial constraints. And that's hard for some people to take. But if we're going to be fiscally responsible in all of our programs, that has to be a must. But if the board says otherwise, we do otherwise, but also making sure you're fully informed about the decisions and the impact of your decisions that you're about to make tonight. So I don't want anybody after making a decision say, oh, I didn't know that this comes from the general fund and here's the impact. And so there will be an impact and that you just need to know it is an impact. And we're using money not designed for before and after school care, for after school care and preschool. But hopefully if we do it, we want to do it at the lowest amount possible and hoping that it's a one-time deal. But in order to be more fiscally responsible, we just have to work within our financial means in all our respective programs moving forward.
Go ahead, President Duchesne. After that, I had a question.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to note that what Trustee Doss brought up was exactly what I was thinking about. So on slide 22, you know, the amount of contribution from the general fund is very significant, and in some of these it's pretty scary. For option 3, which has the highest number of subsidized students, which has 84, it's close to $500,000 subsidy from the general fund, 468,000 plus the 195.7 for the preschool program. So all in all, that is, you know, that's nearly 0.7 million that we're just that we won't have in the general fund. And I recalled about how the first set of proposals that the district made for cuts this past spring, when we thought the governor was going to cut so deeply, was all the intervention teachers, right, at every campus. It was the intervention teachers, and it was the, it was those programs that we could lose. And so that's what drove me toward looking at option 6, which I think served as many families as we could while trying to minimize the hit on the general fund, because I do desperately want to help our families in our community, and you know, and also I want to provide the best we can for our TK through 12 students, and this will have an impact. Go ahead, Trustee Clark.
Yeah, I just had a question about procedure. To me, it seems like there was a motion on the floor that got a second. And I wasn't trying to push anything through, but can we get back to that? Or, I mean.
Yeah, I think it's time. I just didn't want to, if anybody had an addendum or anything they wanted to make or had any questions about it, but there is an open motion on the floor. And I think it's probably time to call for a vote on that.
Hold on, Vice President Duran has her hand up.
Yeah, I've had it up for.
Go ahead.
I've had it up for a little while, so I do want to mention this. I know that the district got money, a budget from, I guess, the feds of $1.6 million for mitigating circumstances. And please clarify me if I'm wrong, Superintendent Wells. But if that's the correct amount of money, the 0.6 could go towards the child care. I understand that, you have to spend the money for the PPE, et cetera. But if we look at it that way, there's still $1 million for the PPE. And we could use the other money for, like I said, the kids that have been most impacted during COVID and would really help their families. So I think this, and at the same time, to be honest, we're talking about potentially having a new position, for example. And so there is money out there. And yeah, we may have to make cuts at the end of the school year, but by then, hopefully we'll have sort of come to the end of COVID.
So I actually want to clarify on that point, Vice President Duran, so that the Fed money that we receive through the state are for learning loss mitigation money based on the enrollment of TK to 12. So the funding is formulated based on our TK to 12 students. So I asked CDE and other school services, and they haven't got back to me if we can use this money to fund our daycare program or preschool program, because how we get funded was really clearly towards to TK to 12. So then I think they're also working on it if we are allowed to take the fund for TK to 12 and use it for daycare and preschool programs. So it has not been determined, or we have not heard from them. So that is not something that we know for sure at this point.
I have a quick question. Well, two quick questions. One, if the 84, if we have the option 3 and it's the 84 students, if there aren't 84 that apply, then do the remainder of the spots go to full fee families? That's my first question. And then my second question, President Trutang, can you, once we're done with that, go back over the motion just to refresh our memory a little bit before we vote? That's
I just wanted to maybe Jackie can clarify. So my interpretation from these numbers is that each classroom of 12 people we add actually reduces our deficit, that our classrooms of 12 I should clarify. Each classroom of 12 full fee families that we add is a net income gain. You don't have a scenario here where that's totally clear, but the fact that if you add 24 full paid families from option 2 to option 6, you actually reduce the deficit. So every time we add a classroom that's full fee paying, we're able to support more subsidized students. So, it's possible that using the TK classrooms or other spaces a non-starter, but I just want to be clear that the school age program has always subsidized the preschool program, in part because full fees cover the costs of providing school age care, and it still does in this model, even though we have lower ratios. So I just, given that there are still some unknowns about our space, and a couple other board members asked to explore how we could serve more families, I think for me, if we could serve more than 48 subsidized families by opening up more classrooms for full fee families, that would help us, I think, get closer to the goals that Trustee Doss and Vice President Duran have raised of could we serve more families. It seems clear to me that if we have space for 84 subsidized students, we'll get them. We already have 81 full fee families. There's no reason to think that we wouldn't fill all those with subsidized families. The other thing I just want to say is the survey, I think I remember almost none of the full fee families said they would pay for remote childcare. So I just want to notice that if we're not able to open in person and this is remote, we may not get any full fee families And so option 6, if we're not able to open in person, may not actually really exist. And then we may need to make another decision about how we want to sort of fill that space.
Right, so I think our page 21, the remote learning option, when you compare the option 6 to the in-person option 6, you will see there is a less expenditures. The reason is, and also first of all, I think you can notice that the family fees on page 21, Julie, I'm sorry, could you pull up that page 21? Thank you. So you will see the family fees for option 6, 208. And the next page, the family fees, you will see 270 for option 6. So the reason is that I take out family fees because I also expect that family might be attending if they are remote model. So in that case, you'll see less family fees. However, in salaries and benefits, we will have a significant cost reduced as well because we will need less staffing for the remote learning. So you can see the differences on option 6 for page 21 and 22 and the cost variances.
Sorry, since we're on this page, I did ask a question about option 3, wondering if somebody could address that. Just asking if the full 84 spots aren't used by subsidized families, if the leftover spots will go towards full paid students.
Yeah, so I think in a practical sense, if we had 84 spots open and we're not able to fill them with subsidized families, then we would offer those available spaces to families paying fees.
So then couldn't we just do option 3 and option 6 and kind of marry the two? Or is there something I'm missing there where we can't do that?
Trustee Dawes, can I ask a question for clarification just so I understand your question? You're referring to option 3, correct?
I'm referring to option 3 and the things that I like about option 3 being applied to option 6. So that
you mean $500,000 to the general fund there?
Well, I don't think it would be $500,000 to the general fund. Instead of 48, maybe if that number was 56, or maybe if it was 60 in the option 6. My point is that, and I know this is a very general sense, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but I'm just trying to put it in perspective. If a subsidized family and I'm looking for care, and I have everything in place, and I am a subsidized family, or I'm a student at UC Berkeley, whatever it is, and I need to send my kids to ACC, that is my option. And the other subsidized programs in the area are all full because you have to essentially be essential in one way or another in order to get that subsidy. So those people have been working through this pandemic. Their kids are in those programs are full. There are programs that are available. Those programs are paid. So if we have full fee families, and we have full fee families that are willing to pay extra and willing to pay more just to keep the program open, that means that they could also take that money and pay for the YMCA, who doesn't offer the subsidized care. They offer scholarships, which is different. Or they could pay for the Friendship Club, which does not offer subsidized. You just have to pay. So they have more options, is what I'm saying. So we can't also limit their options. We can't also limit the subsidized family options because their options are already limited, which is why they receive the subsidized care. The full fee families, lucky for them, have options because they have the money to pay. That money works everywhere because it's just regular money that they can use to apply to different programs. It doesn't mean they have to leave Albany. It means that their options are where they can go to different. So it doesn't, we don't limit their options by not providing the care, because their options are, they have more because it's money that they could use in different places. But if we limit the amount of subsidized families that can use our program, we are limiting their options, and their options are already limited, is what I'm saying. So I don't feel comfortable doing that. I like everything else that's happening there, but I don't feel comfortable limiting the options for people whose options are already limited. It doesn't seem fair, especially to open up spots for people whose options are not limited, because they can take that money and go to different programs. I want everybody to stay in Albany. Like, we're one big family. I want everybody to stay here. So I would hope that there will be programs open like the YMCA or the Friendship Club, but they just don't have the subsidies to be able to, for us to limit those options for people. I hope that makes sense.
I think the issue is that, the issue is that it will cost us $500,000, which doesn't mean it's not a good idea. But I'm curious why you say you don't think it'll cost that much. Is that because you don't actually think we'll have 84 subsidized families, or?
Yeah, I don't think that we'll have that number. I just think that if we don't want to tie our hands behind our back and then be forced to turn people away or limit people's options whose options are already limited, I guess is my thing. I think that when it all comes down to it, I think that we're going to fit more into option 6, but I wouldn't want to vote on that and then 2 families contact me and say their family's 49 and 50, and then we don't have any options for them, because there are no other options for them in Albany. They don't exist. So we essentially are telling them good luck, but there's nowhere else we can send them, because there's no other program that would accept these subsidies. If I'm wrong, then please correct me so that we can send that communication out to the community. But I've been here for a long time and I've researched these programs, and ACC is the only subsidized program in Albany. All the other programs are expensive.
Well, then what we should do, Brian, based on what you're saying, is we should go with option 3. And if 84 students cannot be found that are subsidized, then those positions would automatically go to the paid students. So as opposed to trying to somehow put the 2 together, just go option 3 and start off with 84 subsidized. And then if there are not enough students, fine, turn it over to paid students.
Can we maybe ask about what does our waiting list look like now? And is it possible to tell from the waiting list how many hours families are requesting and if they're subsidized or not?
Sorry, sir.
I just want to ask a procedure question, and I'm just, I do know there's a motion and a second. We can go and do some other additional research, but I don't know whether or not you want to go through with that motion and second first, and if it died, we continue the conversation or consider alternative motion. Just wanted to get clarification on the procedural.
Yeah, well, I was about to call for the vote, but then we had a couple of more comments, and actually it made me wonder if I should make an addendum to the motion stating that the district office would report back to the board about the viability of using the 2 additional rooms at ACC itself, at the Jackson Street facility, but
maybe, President Tutain, did you procedurally want to see whether or not the motion you made could carry? because that may or may not be an option if the motion you made carries. And then if it doesn't, maybe looking at alternative motions. Just wondered.
Okay, well, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. A lot of discussion around here. So Trustee Doss asked for a restatement because it has been a long time. And I see we also have passed our extension as well. So we'll have to vote again on a further extension of the meeting. But to restate, this motion is to inform the district that the board prefers returning to in-person all-day childcare as soon as possible with the option 6 model, making sure that we earn our full contract that's available and not privatizing any part of our contract. So that is the motion that I believe was seconded by Trustee Clark. And so that is what is on the floor. If we could have a roll call vote, please.
Not done yet. Sure. I will note that student board member Mala is absent, and we'll start with Trustee Clark.
Yes.
Vice President Duran.
No.
President Trutain.
Yes.
Trustee Hinckley.
No.
Trustee Doss.
No.
Okay, so that motion fails. So if any board member would like to come up with a new motion, we can discuss and vote on that.
I like that motion. The only thing I don't like about it is limiting the ability for subsidized families to apply and participate in the program. So if there's a way to reword it that does not exclude those families, then I'd be all for it. Like I say, I know that it's our duty to put numbers on things, but that's why we have Chief Business Official Jackie Kim. She puts it right out there. She gives us the numbers. They're always fantastic, and they really paint a clear picture. But when we're talking about families, this is a pandemic that's happening. The whole world is changing. I see it every day. I'm delivering food 4 days a week to families in need. Those same families are going to need childcare. We can't vote on a program that tells them no. We can't pass a motion that tells these same families that we're saying that we want to serve, and these same families that we receive email after email, and everybody's telling me, what about these families? We can't then pass a motion that will essentially limit them being able to use our programs, because that's why they exist. So maybe it's going to be a little bit more expensive, but maybe we should be more creative about how we make it less expensive by having one teacher for 24 students during distance learning, and then bringing back the additional people once the school is open. So then we're spending less money during that time and then more money later. So it's not, hit on the butt, but let's be more creative. I don't want to jump into the weeds of it, because that's you guys to jump into the weeds of it. It's my job to look out for the community that voted me in here. And I don't feel comfortable voting on something that's going to leave some of those community members out in the cold. It's not the right thing to do. So I'm hoping that we can, I really like that motion. I'm just hoping that we can amend it to include subsidized families, and then I'd be happy to redo it.
I have a suggestion, President Tutain.
Go ahead.
Just to kind of throw this out there for the rest of the board, maybe a compromise. Would people be willing to take a look at, I believe it's option 5, which would increase the amount of spots, or or even option 4. Opposed to just going all the way to option 3, but just a thought.
I mean, what I have heard Trustee Doss and Trustee Duran saying is we want to serve as many subsidized families as possible, which is option 3. And that if, as someone said, if we don't fill those 84 slots, then with subsidized families, then it goes to fee-based families. I think that the only option that reflects the intent of that is option 3.
Well, then have somebody make a motion for option 3.
I move that we select option 3 with the understanding that if there are not 84 subsidized families available or interested, that those slots would open to paid students.
Can I make a friendly amendment to your motion, Clementina, Vice President? Can we also include the beginning part of President Trutane's motion that we move toward in-person childcare as soon as possible, serving the greatest number of families that we can, and that we don't privatize any part of our contract, or I think that was how you phrased it, and that we pursue option 3 to serve the greatest number of subsidized families who apply, and that we also look into using additional classrooms as possible in order to raise additional revenues to cover the subsidized families, including the 2 TK classrooms.
The 2 TK. Yes, I accept
the
that.
ones that
I second that motion with the amendment.
May we have a roll call?
Yes, this time we will start with Vice President Duran.
Yes.
President Trutane.
No, I can't vote in favor of something that would have such a huge negative effect on our of our general fund. I think it would hurt education for our TK through 12 students.
Okay. Trustee Hinckley.
Yes.
Trustee Doss.
Yes, and I think that it's important to mention that the families that we're talking about and the families that we've been discussing, they are members of that same community. I'm excited that we were able to do this and provide this for these families. Thank you.
And Trustee Clark.
Yes. We can't hear you, Cam, or we can't hear you, President Trutane.
The motion passes with Vice President Duran, Trustees Doss, Clark, and Hinckley in favor, and Board President Trutane against. Okay, so that ends our item, our action item, and the only business that we have remaining is upcoming agenda items. And let's see. I think I can share that on my screen. It's taking a minute. Okay, I don't know if that's large enough for the board to see. So next week on August 11th, we have an update on the road to reopening schools. I'm going to try to make that bigger. So sorry, guys, my computer is acting up. Okay. We have a special education update. We're going to see the budget revision for this upcoming school year. That's our complete budget. Well, excuse me, that's the revision to the complete budget. We will not see the complete budget package. We're going to discuss in open session the concept of a special education director. We're going to have a contract amendment to our superintendent's contract coming up. We're going to have the service employees contract and an item brought by a group of our students, diversify our narrative, is a student request for diverse curriculum materials, TK through 12. On August 25th, we have a construction update talking about our seismic safety, particularly in our buildings that are not new. The new buildings are, of course, going to be built to the current and highest state standard. The existing buildings are going to be voluntarily upgraded on our schools for Ocean View and Marin that are going to have a mix of some voluntarily upgraded buildings and some brand new buildings. And we'll learn more about exactly what that means in terms of their seismic safety. We'll also entertain an item with for the superintendent, chief business official, contract authority. And also we'll have a road to reopening schools update. At all of our regular meetings, we will have a road to reopening schools update, even if it's very brief, even if it's just, we remain on the watch list, our situation has not changed. We will still touch base on this item at all future meetings. Okay. And with that, we shall adjourn. See you next Tuesday.